fire department, they helped to prepare me before I got to the emergency room. They helped save my life. Well, right now across the country, it's not just the concern of health insurance premiums doubling or tripling where millions of people could lose coverage. Under this thing called the Big Beautiful Bill, my Republican colleagues here said, well, we're going to have the largest cut in Medicaid funding since the program's been created. In addition to that, how about my Republican colleagues saying, well, let's also go after food programs, and the largest cut to food programs across America were included in that bill. The reason I bring up Medicaid is in New Mexico, we had a Republican governor that actually embraced Medicaid expansion. And so New Mexico became one of the states that had the most uninsured people per capita to one of the most insured because of that expansion. People were able to get care and help. Well, those rural health clinics that also provide care to so many of our Medicaid beneficiaries in New Mexico, all of a sudden when federal Medicaid dollars go away, they might close. So I'm going to go back to my stroke. Time is not on our side. If someone has to travel hours to try to get into a medical facility because the rural health clinics have closed, that might be able to stabilize them the way that that EMT and that paramedic did for me at the local fire department, they may not heal, or worse, they may not live. Now I'm going to get back to one of the conversations we're having right now. How can we work as Democrats and Republicans, work with the president to ensure that health insurance premiums will not double or triple for the American people? One of my constituents told me, Senator Merkley, that it's almost like they're reaching into our pockets and just stealing money. And what I mean by that is, in New Mexico, if these tax credits go away, it's going to cost people about $7,000 a year. $7,000 to hardworking middle-class families. That's taking from their pockets. In addition to that, when they go to the grocery store, well, let me even back up a little there. Remember this president said when he was running as a candidate that on day one he would lower prices for the American people, just like that. Well, at the grocery store, things are getting more expensive. Everything seems to be getting more expensive. Well, that's taking money out of the pockets of the American people. Our constituents, hardworking families, just trying to get by, trying to leave a better life for their kids than they had for their own if they're blessed to have children. Many are worried about how they'll even put food on the table now that those supplemental nutrition assistance programs are delayed, or even this program called WIC. You know, there's acronyms all over our nation's capital. WIC, which is a program for women, infants, and children. How are we going to make decisions across the country to make sure that we're going to provide food to the most vulnerable in the richest nation in the world? Everyone seems to be worried about that except for President Donald Trump. The reason I say that, Senator, is this week, all President Donald Trump seemed to care about was breaking ground on this $250 million ballroom. And some constituents have reached out to my office and, well, what does that mean? And I've told them, well, the president allowed a bulldozer to go and knock down part of the White House so he could build a $250 room to throw some parties in. That's essentially what's happening. I mean, heck, in New Mexico, Senator, if someone's going to do some remodeling to their home, they have to go pull local permits and get permission and follow the rules and all the rest. Not this guy. At a time when people are about to have their health insurance premiums doubled or tripled, food programs are getting taken away, this president says his priority is build a $250 million party room. That's a lot of money. That's more money than most people will see in their lives. I mean, heck, $1 million is one of those numbers. In addition to that, President Trump decided to throw a picnic yesterday for some of my Senate Republican colleagues that wanted to be there. And I was told that he gave away thousands of dollars of his own personal Trump swag. What's that? Hats, signed bags, pens, I don't know what else was in there. Watches, maybe a pair of his shoes. Now, instead of working to end this shutdown that they started, they decided to have a picnic. And it's my understanding that President Trump may be even leaving the country this weekend, leaving for a week, as opposed to bringing people together. I'm reminded, Senator Merkley, that President Trump said not too long ago in an interview, if there's a shutdown, it's up to the president to bring people together to prevent the shutdown. I think in that same interview, the president said something along the lines of, if there's a shutdown, it's a bad mark on the president. Sounds to me like the president should be bringing people together. Now, one of my constituents last night from Albuquerque, New Mexico, shared with me that she'd been furloughed, a federal employee. She told me she didn't know how she was going to pay this month's bills without a paycheck. She felt that President Trump was doing nothing to end the shutdown, and she didn't know how she could continue handling all the stress of not being paid, because that's something else that we're not talking about here. All the stress, mental health challenges that families are going through. One of my constituents in Las Vegas, New Mexico, has 4 children, a mortgage to pay, and his family lives paycheck to paycheck. He said with all the stress and hurt that is being caused by the Republican shutdown, he doesn't know if people will be able to afford their health care if it's taken away. This week, people across America are watching Donald Trump tear down the east side of the White House, making room for that $250 million ballroom. And then there's a story that I just saw coming in, Senator Merkley, that said President Trump, it looks like he's trying to shake down the Department of Justice to get $230 million for himself. And here's the kicker. The person that would actually have to sign off on giving President Trump $230 million in taxpayer money from the Department of Justice is a guy named Todd Blanche. Anyone that knows who this person is knows that Todd Blanche was President Trump's personal defense attorney. Didn't do so well because he got convicted, but he's the guy that would have to sign off. So I'll sum it up this way, Senator Merkley, and I have a question for you, sir. My colleague from Hawaii said it perfectly yesterday. Here's the quote. There is enough money to bail out Argentina with $40 billion. By the way, for people that don't know what that means, to all the ranchers, cattle ranchers in America, President Donald Trump said he's going to go bail out Argentina by $40 billion of their beef. And what is that going to do to American cattle producers? So anyhow, back to the quote. There's enough money to bail out Argentina with $40 billion. There's enough money to buy Kristi Noem, who's the Secretary of Homeland Security, a $173 million personal jet just to fly a little more comfortably. There's enough money to renovate that ballroom, $250 million bucks, but there isn't enough money for you, the American people. It seems to me the priorities are clear. So will the senator yield for a question?
Yes, I'm yielding for your question.
Senator Merkley, how are Americans supposed to trust an administration that seems so focused on giving things to themselves when Americans are worried they won't be able to afford basic necessities like food and health insurance? I yield to the senator.
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. And you've laid out so many points here about kind of the mismanagement of America's funds. And we could add a few more to them. The craziness of spending more money than it costs to buy a presidential jet to rehab a jet that was given to the president so that he could actually send it on to his personal library after he leaves office. But it is profoundly disturbing, and I appreciate the way you framed it. There's enough money for luxury glitz, for a mega ballroom. I can't even imagine how anything could cost that much to build. I mean, it's going to have an 1/8 inch of gold on every surface or something. I don't know. But that doesn't serve the American people. That doesn't make one single person in America have better health care or better education or a decent home in a decent community or a better job. Doesn't give equality of opportunity. doesn't tackle any of our environmental issues. It is simply a gross display by a president who has constructed his entire administration on the basis of a theory to govern, which is families lose and billionaires win. Families lose their health care, so there can be massive tax breaks for billionaires. They lose their Medicaid on top of their ACA health care in order to fund massive tax breaks for billionaires. They lose their nutrition assistance to fund tax breaks for billionaires. And then over the next 30 years, their bill runs up 30 trillion in additional debt to fund these breaks for billionaires. Maybe I should say trillionaires now. And you think about how that debt, that additional 30 trillion in debt, how much that will compromise the ability to have future programs of health care and housing and education. I mean, the folks in my state are looking at the same thing as the folks of your state. We had last Wednesday the information come out a week ago so people could look on the exchange and see what their policies were going to cost. And we don't have a new comprehensive analysis. The pre-analysis, the projection, was that the average cost would go up not 5% or 10% or 15%, but about 68%. And that's because the premium goes up, the tax credits come down, and you're massively more expensive. Now, maybe a lot more because the average across the country is that premiums payments will go up 114%, more than double. But how do you explain to anyone that you slashed their health care affordability to fund a giveaway of $20 to $40 billion to Argentina, or to fund that new ballroom? I mean, that's insane. I mean, that is, well, just like the rich rubbing our nose in it for ordinary Americans, that you won't be able to afford health care, but wow, we got that new jet, the jet you talked about for Nome. I hadn't heard about that one. We got the new ballroom. We got the tax breaks for the richest people. This government buying for the billionaires, and it ties in to the authoritarian perspective. Because if you're a regular leader of a democracy, you feel you're accountable to the people. And you would never, ever pursue a bill that defunds health care for ordinary families to put more dollars in the pocket of the already richest Americans. But if you're an authoritarian, and the entire time I've been on the floor has been to ring the alarm bells. Ring the alarm bells. Authoritarianism is here now. And I'm told that each time I say this, lots of bells are posted online. So just for my team's fun, ring the alarm bells. I want that to be heard all across America, that we are way off track. This is the wrong way to go. In a democracy, you want to have the foundations for families to thrive because you're accountable to the people, and the people run the operation. But in an authoritarian government, boy, that's not the case at all. Instead, it's like the leaders feel like the people are accountable to them. So if they have to do without, well, too bad. As the phrase goes, let them eat cake. If they don't have bread, oh, let them eat cake. And so there we are. And our responsibility is to say to the American people, the way to stop this authoritarian takeover is to have a very significant, robust demonstrations across America like we had on Saturday, that the citizens have to make a big deal, protest outside our offices, write to us, phone us, give us a hard time, tell us we should be doing more. It's that feedback that really caused me to say I need to try to do more to ring the alarm bells about where we're headed, and thus to be up here all night and now through the morning and into the afternoon. I'm getting a little unsteady on my feet, but if we collectively, through this dialogue, are bringing attention to people and saying, yes, 7 million people were out there in the streets, next time we need 10 million, or do your local demonstration with those who went, hear about what they did, and spread the word that this is not normal. This destruction of our rights, this weaponization of the judiciary to go after political enemies, the effort to open the doors so that the president can deploy with court's approval the military into our cities when there is no rebellion, no insurrection, and no invasion. So that is our responsibility, to call it out and to carry the fight. And I believe the American people are starting to understand just how much their freedoms are being crushed. And that's what we need to be in partnership with to steer this country back and save our republic.
Will the senator from Oregon yield for a question?
I see the senator from Washington State is on the floor, and I would very happy to yield to a question.
I thank the senator from Oregon, and first let me just commend you for what you are doing here throughout the night, throughout today, calling attention to a really critical issue in this country. So many people come up to me, and you know, because we go back and forth to the West Coast all the time, how many people walk up to us and say, what can I do about this? And each one of us has to say, here's what I can do. And I want to thank you for doing what you are doing today, because you're going above and beyond to point out to people that, as your chart says, authoritarianism is here, and it is here now. And we can ignore it, or we can speak out, and you have spent all night long and all day standing on your feet at, I'm sure, great personal sacrifice to fight for everyone in this country and to sound the alarm, as you've been talking about. And so I just personally want to thank you, and I want to reiterate something that you have said for all of these hours, and actually many times to me over the past few months, that the fact that Trump is using his place in government to control every aspect of our life, whether it's what our schools are teaching or not teaching. It's whether or not he's prosecuting his enemies, which he is doing. It's cutting off projects and funding to punish the political opposition. And as you and I both know, we represent, quote, blue states, but we have a lot of red counties and cities and neighborhoods, and even within all of our blue districts. And you can't just randomly say I'm hurting blue without hurting red, because these are all Americans. But he is using his power to do that. We are seeing him, as you know well, in your home state, deploying troops to intimidate Democrats. And I listened to you late last night talk about what is happening in Portland, and the misuse of this kind of power should be frightening to every single American. And we need to stand up and we need to call it out, which is what you are doing today. And even dictating what late night TV host is doing is part of this whole picture that you've been describing. But I came to the floor today as your partner on the Appropriations Committee. We serve on that together, and we all know in this body how important that committee is, because we decide where the funding is going to go in the country. Now, I've been out on this floor, I've been at home, I've been everywhere talking about the power of the purse, which sounds kind of like this quaint little phrase. But it is really important. For anybody who has a family, you know that the person who writes the checks in the checkbook decides where the money's going to go. Well, that power of that checkbook, that power of the purse, as it is called, lands in this side of the aisle, on this side of the White House and Congress. We have the power of the purse. Why is that? Because we represent our constituents from across the country. I'm from Washington State, you from Oregon, people from Illinois and Alabama and Florida all come here to be a voice for their constituents on where their taxpayers are going to go. And within this country, the power of the purse means we have the ability to decide where the money is going to go because we represent our constituents. That's what they call on us to do. And I am seeing Trump do an all-out assault on Congress's power of the purse. So I wanted to come here today and ask you your thoughts on how this president is undermining the power of the purse and how it plays into your ringing the bells about authoritarianism.
Ringing the alarm bells for the authoritarian takeover. And the power of the purse is one of those fundamental ways that, in fact, the president is concentrating his power. The difference between a democracy, in a democracy, the legislature says, here are the programs, here's how we want to run them, and here's how we're going to fund them. And it brings together the collective wisdom of a large group that comes from every portion of the nation, like we do here, our 100 senators from 50 states. And we not only bring our geographic differences, we bring our life differences and our life skills, and all of that helps us form a pretty complex set of decisions about the programs that need more support because of the challenges we're facing as a nation at that moment, and those that can do with less support. And that's our responsibility, but all those voices together are just so central to that. In an authoritarian nation, all of that responsibility, design the program, fund the program, choose whether the program will live or die, is all transferred to the executive. So if we're thinking authoritarians over here, power of the purse with the executive, democracy over here, power of the purse with the legislature. So Russell Vought, the current head of OMB, he's a well-trained, clever man, and he's saying, well, let's see how we can actually take the power of the purse. You passed a bill for fiscal year 25, and now we're not longer in fiscal, but let's say we were. Well, maybe I can just slow walk the funds for the programs I don't want to fund. That way the decision is transferred to the executive. Maybe I can freeze them. Maybe I can impound them, basically permanently take them off the table. See if I can get away with that. Maybe I can send over a request to have Congress formally undo the programs that they have funded. And they did send one of those over, and it was voted. It needed a majority vote in both chambers. But the problem with that is you have a bipartisan vision to serve the entire, these desks to me are now representing the geography of the United States, to serve the entire breadth and depth of our nation with all of our differences. And then on a partisan basis, meaning half the room, they decide what programs to cut. And that means a deal was done in the beginning between Democrats and Republicans, and then it was undone. And the programs that were cut were the programs, by and large, that Democrats had advocated for. How do you do the next deal in that situation? And then we have Mr. Vought saying, what I'll do is pretend I'm going to spend it, but then in the last 45 days, I'll send a notification that I'd like Congress to undo it, but there is a waiting period, so therefore I know what I have done is set it up so that before those 45 days are out, the end of the fiscal year comes, and that bucket that goes to that program goes poof into thin air. And that's the fancy term he's used for the pocket rescission. And so here we are saying to our Republican colleagues, if you're negotiating in good faith to serve the interests and concerns that all 100 senators bring here, then a bill forged in that bipartisan manner can only be undone in a bipartisan manner. And we do rescissions in a bipartisan manner. We do undo funding. We take 1 year, 2 year, 3 year funding that turned out not to be needed or better spent elsewhere, and we pull it back and we put it into a different program. But we do that readjustment in the same bipartisan way we did the initial program. So we're saying to our colleagues across the aisle, if the power of the purse means something, and it does, the difference between authoritarian government and a democracy, then work with us to defend our Constitution. Defend that what we have done together cannot be undone by the executive. And so far, we have not received a yes, we will defend the Constitution. And what I hear is mainly, yeah, President Trump would never go for that. When you hear that, you know you're trapped in an authoritarian, because the vision of our nation is that we, the Congress, will forge these programs and decide how to fund them, how much. And when it's like, can't do that because the Trump would be upset. Well, that just confirms we are in authoritarianism now, and it's not just the power of the purse, of course. It's attack on due process. It's attack on free press. It's attack on freedom of speech. It is the weaponization of the Department of Justice. It is the ignoring the laws that apply to the executive completely, like firing all the IGs, getting rid of all the referees. In the book that I really spent the night trying to use as a framework in order to say, hey, experts who have studied how democracies die, they don't die with people with guns anymore. They die, people get elected, and then they follow the authoritarian playbook on how to basically undo the checks and balances and amplify the power. And another piece of that we should be very concerned about in the Northwest right now, more Portland, but who knows what happens in Seattle, is trying to carve a path in which Trump has court decisions that say he can put troops into the street whenever he wants. And that is a massively dangerous amplification of authoritarian power. And that's why what we do this year makes such a difference, that we have to protest and say this is not normal. We have to ring the alarm bells. We have to praise the 7 million people who got out there and said no kings in the United States. And that's such a beautiful short way of saying no authoritarianism. We want our republic back, and we're willing to fight to make that happen.
And we want our voices to be heard. That's what you're doing, and I thank the senator from Oregon for all he's been doing for so long, for so many years, but especially for the last 20-plus hours that you've been on the floor. Too many hours on the floor, reminding us all of why this is so critical.
I note that my colleague from Delaware is on the floor.
Yes,
I would welcome a question if you have one.
Will the senator from Oregon yield for a question?
I will yield for a question.
First, let me say thank you, Senator Merkley, for your tenacity, your energy, your compassion, and your love for this country. I mean, really, that's what this is about. That's why you have been standing on this floor for over 20 hours, and I want to say thank you on behalf of the American people. And I want to say, Mr. President, we are now 21 days into this Republican shutdown and well over 200 days into the Trump administration. Costs for housing are up, food prices are up, energy costs have gone up, and we are about to see our health care costs skyrocket for millions of Americans, all while the president pushes this country to a literal brink of a constitutional crisis. So let's recap. The Department of Defense is trying to censor the press. This administration is offering deals to universities to teach Trump priorities, taking away independence and academic freedom. They tried to push dissenters off airwaves, but this is America. And Senator Merkley, you and I know here the people have the power, and the power of the people matters. Here the voices of our communities hold weight, and that's why I stand with you as you ring the alarms. The people are standing up, they're speaking out, and they're saying enough is enough. What does that look like? It looks like journalists from MSNBC to Fox News handing in their DOD press badges, choosing to stand up for their First Amendment rights rather than bowing to the whims of the Secretary of Defense. It means universities are refusing to play ball, declining the offer. It means Americans use their power of their purses to say, you will not silence someone like Jimmy Kimmel. and he was reinstated. But it doesn't stop there. It's an unprecedented move by federal judges appointed by Democrats and Republicans alike that are speaking out on an impending judicial crisis over the Supreme Court's emergency orders. State governments are joining compacts to protect access to public health for citizens as this administration rips away access to vaccines. Airports across America are refusing to play this administration's propaganda videos, and perhaps most importantly, millions of Americans from across our country have made their voices known and heard. 7 million Americans did what I think was truly a part of the American spirit by using their voices in a peaceful way, assembling, doing it in a way that was both joyful but also patriotic, and demanding that we in Congress also stand up. So we are standing up for our communities, and thank you again, Senator Merkley, for doing so. And we are fighting for families across America who are about to see their health care coverage go up or maybe even be eliminated. In this moment, we don't need a king. The people need a president for all of the people. Not a $20 billion bailout for Argentina, not a new White House gold ballroom when people can't even afford to pay their rent or to buy a home on their own, and not a Justice Department bailout. All while November 1st is fast approaching and tens of millions of Americans face this healthcare crisis. Rising costs or total elimination of their health care or medical debt. Costs are already high, and now this. It's time to do the right thing and to take a stand. And with the president poised to leave town, we ask that he stay and pull together the partners, the House, which has been out of session, and I came from the House. I don't think I ever saw anything like this, where they literally have been missing in action for weeks. As a matter of fact, for our August break, they left in July. This is unprecedented, and we need them back at the table. They need to do the work. And so my question to you, Senator Merkley, in light of what the president wants to spend money on and what the American people need, does the president have his priorities straight? Are his priorities right on behalf of the American people?
So much to my colleague from Delaware. And the question rather answers itself after listening to all the points you were making, which are right on. How can it possibly be the right priorities if you're spending your money on tax breaks for billionaires while cutting the tax credits that enable families to buy insurance at an affordable price? How can it possibly be the right thing to do that you're cutting child nutrition while you're spending a huge amount on a ballroom, undoubtedly Trumpian gold-style ballroom? How much was it, 200 million or 300 million? Some crazy, crazy sum. I can't even imagine how you could spend that much on a room. And you mentioned this $20 billion bailout, 20 billion with a B, bailout for Argentina. Now, that one came out of nowhere. I don't remember a bill on the floor here saying that we're passing a spending bill that has in it 20, and the president said it may be as much as $40 billion bailout. Is there some authority I don't know about? Maybe, I don't know, the books are complicated, but I doubt it, because what this president is doing as an authoritarian, it's just saying, I'm going to do what the hell I want. I'm in charge. The bank account of America is mine. Hell, I'm going to, build a glitzy ballroom, and I'm going to try to refurbish a jet for an Air Force One that will only be workable for a few months, if that, before I send it off to my presidential library. Huge waste of our money. And this bailout, though, for Argentina, earlier talking to a colleague from Washington State who said, a lot of soybeans are shipped through Washington State, but they're normally bought by China. Well, China isn't buying a single bean this year because of the tension and the argument between our two nations over tariffs. One moment the president's put in a 50% tariff on China, and the next moment they're saying they're not going to send out any strategic minerals, critical minerals. Next moment, well, I'll put a 100% tariff on you. I mean, nobody makes an investment in the United States of America, a factory here, when we're in tariff chaos. There's nothing about this that does anything except throw people up and down, and everyone gets hurt. They don't know if the tariffs is going to affect what they sell. They don't know if they're going to be able to affect the inputs. Are they going to be stored? Are they going to be wasted? Are they going to be plowed back into the ground for fertilizer? I don't know. But here's what I do know, that this chaos is terrible for America. And the small business world came and talked to me yesterday, representatives from, and maybe you had them in your office as well, and they said, Main Street is Pain Street. And I did hear that. I'm going to note that Senator Markey may have been the first person I heard that from, but I thought that was a way to describe it. And they certainly said, yes, there's two components of that pain. One is the loss of the credits to buy health care, because small businesses don't have big plans with big insurers. They provide some help, and folks go and buy on the exchange. And they said, second of all, the tariffs. So Main Street is Pain Street. That's not a good future for America. And families with no health insurance, that's a terrible look for America. And by look, I mean, I don't mean the atmospherics of it. I mean, that is the wrong mission in a republic. And the connection I've been drawn between Trump's authoritarian personality and tendencies is that an authoritarian feels that people are accountable to him. So he can do any damn thing he wants and control anything without advice or controls or checks from anyone. And he's hated it every time checks were applied in the past. He's going after some of those folks now who applied those checks in the past. And the leader of a democracy says, I'm accountable to the people. The people need health care, housing, education, a good paying job, investment in infrastructure, equality of opportunity, and let's take on some of those environmental problems. That's what a leader in democracy does. So here we have this authoritarian president crushing our freedoms, trying to steal the power of the purse from Congress to concentrate it in the executive, proceeding to spend money wherever he wants, that $20 billion. I'd love to see it not be a court. I'd rather have all of the senators right here say, let's pass a bill right now, and say, hell no. A lot of that $20 billion is going to the debt that's been built up in Argentina. And friends of President Trump have reportedly bought that debt at a huge discount. I didn't see how much of a discount. But what that means, if you buy $1 of debt, and you buy, say, let's make it math easy, 25 cents, then you get a 400% return if the money goes to Argentina and they pay off the debt at face value. That's not about making America first. That's about making Scott Bessent and his friends, at least I've seen Scott Bessent's name in some of these articles, and his friends who are connected to buying up Argentina debt. I'm not sure if Scott himself bought it or not. But the point is, make some billionaires richer. It's another make a few friends of the president and friends of his cabinet members richer. Well, that $20 billion, or possibly $40 billion, the president said. Think about that, $20 billion, that's $50 for every single American tossed in a pot to hand out to a strong man in Argentina. $40 billion, $100 a person handed out to a strong man. Every one of us, take $100 out of our pocket.
Senator, yield for one more question.
I will yield for another question. Thank you.
Thank you. As you talked about the small businesses, Senator, I was reminded that as we look at who is actually purchasing this health care in the marketplace. A lot of people don't even know they're on ACA and receiving the tax credit, that half of them are small businesses. I come from Delaware. We are urban, suburban, rural, and coastal. And so we also know that a quarter of farmers and ranchers are getting their health care this way. And then we think about the fact that this issue is disproportionately affecting red states, not just blue states. All Americans are going to be hurt. This is why your ringing the alarm is so important. And I would ask a very simple question. Is there a connection between the healthcare crisis that we are in and an authoritarian regime?
Oh, there is absolutely such a powerful connection, because the authoritarian doesn't care about the fundamental programs for the people, because they don't feel they're accountable to the people. So just as our authoritarian president is weaponizing judiciary to go after his opponents, is using the power of the government over licenses and mergers in order to try to control what our broadcasting does, an attack on freedom of speech, trying to compel what our universities teach by threatening the collapse and threatening taking away the research grants and telling them they can't have foreign students that are essential to their revenue stream. All of those authoritarian pieces, the stealing of the purse, but then there's this piece, the philosophy. And the philosophy is the people owe me, the authoritarian, not I'm accountable to them. So therefore, it's totally legit to go for legislation that slashes the programs that are fundamental to families to make the rich richer. And I want to go back to that picture that I had up earlier of the billionaires standing behind President Trump at the inauguration. And at that point, maybe we didn't know for sure, but he had campaigned on helping families, but we didn't see the champions of families behind him. We saw the billionaires behind him. That is exactly what's happened. The philosophy is families lose and billionaires win. And our effort, as those in a democracy, we are fighting for the vision of families thrive and the rich and powerful pay a fair share.
Would my colleague yield for another question?
I would yield for a question, yes.
And I thank my colleague from Delaware for her great questions. And I want to, before I ask my question, I just want to thank the great senator from Oregon for his strength, his fortitude, his integrity, and just shining a spotlight on this erosion of democracy under Trump in so many different ways. I've been to the floor earlier and we've talked about it. But now I'd like to ask a question about one of the most serious threats that our American people face, which is the healthcare crisis, a horrible crisis that is going to leave millions without any health care insurance at all. That's going to raise premiums for people from $500 to $1,000 a month, not a year. That will close rural hospitals. That will kick people out of nursing homes where they will have nowhere to go. And I'd remind my colleagues that this president, instead of negotiating a way out that addresses the crisis with Leader Jeffries and I, is going away for 6 days. It's outrageous for him to leave on a foreign trip while the American people are suffering, and we get closer and closer and closer to the time, starting November 1st, when people are going to have to make that awful decision. Do I leave my family with no health care at all because I can't afford it? It's a horrible, horrible decision. And yet Leader Jeffries and I asked the president to meet with us before he left. He refused. The reporting is that Johnson and Thune and he were on the phone and agreed they wouldn't even talk to us. And instead he's going away while people are suffering. He ought not to do that. And what is he spending his time on instead? Eroding our democracy. Doing these faux ads. Screwing up forcing networks and TV stations and media to bow to his whim, using the Justice Department as an attack dog against his enemies, arresting people, as my good friend from Oregon has pointed out repeatedly, on the streets with people, the arresting people, whoever the hell they are, they have no identification, and the people are arrested without even being told why they're being arrested, and who knows what the heck is going on. He is spending all his time on eroding democracy, taking away our rights. The people expect him not to go on a foreign trip. This president who fancies himself a king, but instead to do the people's business and help us, sit down with us, negotiate a way out of this health care crisis. We all know, I think, and I'd ask my colleague, he knows, I believe, that before Donald Trump leaves the country, he should at the very least sit down and negotiate in a serious way and address the health care crisis that affects the American people. Shouldn't we be working to lower people's premiums, to keep rural hospitals open, to prevent people from being kicked out of nursing homes, to ensure that research that saves lives continues? Shouldn't the president listen to the cares of the American people and their desperate need on health care rather than taking a foreign trip? Jeffries and I asked him yesterday. We demanded, really, he sit down and talk to us and negotiate, not just talk to us, negotiate a serious approach to avoid all the devastating things that will occur. And he said 4 hours later, after conferring with Thune and Johnson, no, he wouldn't. Well, that is a disgrace. So I would ask my colleague, I would ask him, shouldn't the president be spending time addressing the health care crisis rather than spending all this time eroding our democracy? If he negotiated a fair treatment of people with their health care, he'd be doing something good, and when he erodes our democracy, he's doing something evil. So his priorities are wacky and misplaced and awful and so detrimental to what the American people want. So my question to my colleague is this, and one more thing. Doesn't my colleague, and there are a bunch of questions here, agree that Trump is the focal point of this health care crisis? That Johnson is paralyzed because of the divisions in his caucus, that Thune just goes along, that the president, this President Trump, is the person who could get the Republicans to pass a decent proposal, a fair proposal, a proposal that helps the American people out of this crisis. And the president is the focal point because he can get Jeffries and Thune to act, and there's probably no one else. And yet, he's flying away, ignoring this issue facing the American people after he's eroded our democracy, as the senator from Oregon has pointed out. He's flying away and abandoning the American people. Isn't it correct? Does my friend from Oregon agree that the president's priorities are so detrimental to the American people, are really perverse, in that he seems to enjoy eroding democracy and doesn't even give a damn when the American people are suffering? So I'd ask my colleague to answer that series of questions.
My colleague from New York, the minority leader, is absolutely right. The Trump priorities are absolutely perverse. Well, here we are in a structure of the Senate. And what is the Senate about? Coming together and saying, here's where I want to go. Where do you want to go? How can we make those two things work together to make America better? We can't always find the answer, But I'll tell you, one thing's for damn sure, you can't find the answer if you can't sit down and have the conversation. And here we are with the House on vacation for over a month, and I guess they're getting paid. And here we are in the Senate without an agreement to just sit down and talk to each other about the framework, because it appears that the key, as you have suggested, the linchpin, is it will not sit down and offer ideas and work out a deal without Trump in the room, or Trump guiding the outcomes. So he is the factor. So as he jets off, and in Oregon last week, people on a week ago Wednesday, they saw what their prices are going to be. The premiums are higher, the credits are lower, they got to fill in the gap in between. And are they going to be able to afford insurance? Are they going to be able to make that decision by January 1st? They are stressed about this. I had small business in yesterday, representatives from Oregon, and the vision there is Main Street is in Pain Street because of the tariffs and because of the fact that many of them, a large share of them, buy their insurance on the exchange. And this man who runs a small company, it's a lighting for events company, and I think he said he had 4 employees. He was able to talk to 3 of them, and the 3 of them said, we're not buying insurance. We can't afford it. We looked at the new prices. We can't afford it. So they're going to go without insurance. We all know the huge calamity. Well, when the Speaker of the House that I saw on the boob tube, on the television, says there's nothing to talk about, I think immediately there's 20 million reasons to talk about. Those 20 million are the 20 million Americans that are seeing these huge increases. Many of them will not be able to buy insurance at all. And let's add to that, since the bill also is just 15 months out now from slashing in a devastating fashion our Medicaid program, which in combination with the effects on the Affordable Care Exchange will put 15 million people out of health care, 235,000 in my home state of Oregon. 70% of the kids in my rural areas are part of the Oregon Health Plan, or Medicaid. I can just not even conceive of the carnage that will be done to the quality of life without health care available to so many people. Isn't that a hell of a number of reasons to sit down and brainstorm together? You can't get to a common purpose if you can't even talk to each other. You're here, your office is open, you're available to talk, you're inviting them to talk, they're saying no. That is a travesty in our republic.
So to just renew my question succinctly, does my friend in Oregon believe, as I believe, that before the president jets away on this foreign trip, shouldn't he sit down with Leader Jeffries and I, as we wanted him very much to do, demanded he do, and negotiate a solution that addresses this horrible crisis, which my colleague from Oregon has addressed in so many ways, whether it's ACA premiums or Medicaid or nursing homes or community health centers or scientific research. All of those need to be addressed, and this president is flying away. Isn't that appalling?
That is horrific that he's flying away. He absolutely should be sitting down right now and holding a conversation with you about how we solve this problem for millions of Americans.
Let me thank my friend from Oregon for his amazing, strong, persistent efforts. I yield back to the senator from Oregon.
I see my colleague from Vermont on the floor. Take a question if he has one.
Will my colleague yield for a question?
I will yield for a question.
Well, let me thank Senator Merkley for today pointing a finger at one of the great crises our country, one of the greatest crises our country has faced, I think, since the Civil War. And that is that every day we have a president who is moving this country into an authoritarian form of society. You know, as a nation, what we have always expected in our democracy is that if you disagree with me, we debate the issue. You don't think I'm a good senator? Run against me. You think I'm wrong on an issue? Write a letter to the editor. Do a podcast. Be critical of me in any way you want. But what very few people in America believe is that we should give more and more power to a megalomaniac who sits in the White House, who disrespects every day the Constitution of the United States and the rule of law. And what saddens me very much is when we think back on the history of this country, going back to the extraordinarily brave men and women who put their lives on the line and sometimes died during the Revolutionary War. Tens of thousands of Americans took on the greatest military power on earth, led by the King of England, in order to say, we are tired of your rule. We want to rule ourselves. And then in 1789, these brilliant people came up with a constitution, and the essence of that constitution, having learned their lesson from the King of England, who had absolute power, is what they said: we are going to create a constitution that will never give absolute power to any one person or one entity. So they created an executive branch, the president, legislative branch, Congress, House, and the Senate, and a judiciary whose function is to provide checks and balances on each other. Rather extraordinary document, 1789. And since then, we have had so many millions of men and women putting their lives on the line and sometimes dying in order to defend that Constitution, to understand that what freedom is about is the right to disagree, that we do not have to live under the control of one person. And in an unprecedented way, and I know my colleague from Oregon has been talking about this, every day there is another attack on basic American freedoms. The First Amendment, not the second, not the third, First Amendment to the Constitution is freedom of the press. And that was not an accident. They understood that in order to maintain a free society, you had to have the right of people to express their point of view, to write what they wanted to do, to rally people around their point of view. And yet we have, in an unprecedented way, a president who has sued one major media after another, ABC, CBS, Meta defunded PBS, defunded the NPR. This is a president who does not want to be criticized. Well, guess what, Mr. President? In a democracy, you will be criticized. I will be criticized. Senator from Oregon will be criticized. That is what a democracy is about. And if you don't like criticism, get out of the White House. Get out of politics. We're not going to sit back and allow one media after another, intimidated, frightened that if they stand up tomorrow and run a story critical of the President of the United States, oh my God, they may be sued. And you got an FCC chairman, I think, I say to my friend, during the Jimmy Kimmel episode, was now threatening to rescind licenses of networks if the White House did not like some of the content that was coming out. That's not the America that we love, not the America that we are prepared to defend. But it's not just the media. You got a president who was suing law firms. And what was the crime of these law firms? What did they do that was so terrible? Well, they had clients who went to court against the president. Gee, last that I heard, that's what happens in a country. You know, people go to court. And we don't then try to blackmail and intimidate law firms by saying, we're going to sue you. You better not have clients who are going to attack me. We have a president now who's going to war against universities, trying to break freedom of speech, freedom of dissent on college campuses. You stand up, you protest, Hey, we're going to take away money from you. We don't like the content of your courses. We don't like your teachers, your faculty, the president of the university. Your views on Gaza? Sorry, you're not going to get federal funding. We have a president who's usurping the powers of the United States Congress. Every fourth grader understands Congress has the power of the purse. President, if he likes it, signs the bill. But when you sign that appropriations bill, that money goes out. You don't have the right to say, oh, California, New York, Vermont, you voted against me. You ain't going to get the money that was appropriated. That is not what this country is about, and it is not what the Constitution is about. A few minutes ago, Senator Blunt Rochester asked, I thought, a pretty profound question, and that is, what is the relationship between authoritarianism and the healthcare crisis that we're in right now? And as the senator from Oregon has mentioned, when Trump was inaugurated, sitting right beside him, right behind him, were the three wealthiest people in the world. Remember that, the senator from Oregon? It was Mr. Musk, Mr. Bezos, and Mr. Zuckerberg. And right behind them was some 14 or 15 other billionaires. Oh, there's, all right, thank you, Senator. All right, there's Mr. Zuckerberg, Mr. Bezos, Mr. Musk, and a couple of other billionaires there as well. And I was thinking, I was at the inauguration, kind of up front, and as I listened and I saw what was going on, heard Trump's speech, I was thinking about Abraham Lincoln in Gettysburg and one of the pivotal battles of the Civil War to end the abomination of slavery. And Lincoln gets up a few days, I think, after that terrible war, blood still on the ground. And he says to the American people, a few days after that battle, he said, these brave soldiers, in so many words, did not die in vain. Because they died in order to maintain a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, not as Trump would have us, a government of the billionaire class, by the billionaire class, and for the billionaire class. And when Senator Blunt Rochester asked the question, what is the connection between authoritarianism and healthcare? Well, I'll tell you what the connection is. Right now, under the Trump administration, the billionaire class has never, ever had it so good. These guys, sitting right behind Trump in his inauguration, are now combined hundreds of billions of dollars richer. They donated to Trump's campaign. They've given him gifts since. They are doing phenomenally well, while at the same time, 60% of our people, working class people, low-income people, are struggling to put food on the table, pay for child care, send their kids to college, pay for the basic necessities of life, pay for housing, etc. Billionaire class under Trump never, ever had it so good. And then we got a working class in America struggling to survive. And in particular, let us never forget, and I know the senator from Oregon has mentioned it many times, that the reason that Trump and his Republican friends made $1 trillion in cuts to Medicaid, to throw 15 million people off the health care they currently have, and studies, by the way, suggest that when you throw 15 million low-income and working-class people off of their health care, some 50,000 people a year will die unnecessarily. So why did Trump and his friends do that? Well, the answer is obvious. In that same terrible bill, they gave $1 trillion in tax breaks to the 1%, to the people sitting right behind the president when he was inaugurated. Does anybody in America really believe that it makes sense to give $1 trillion in tax breaks to the richest people in America and at the same time throw 15 million working class people off of their health care, and then, as the senator from Oregon indicated, right now in Vermont and all over this country, people are receiving notices from their insurance companies. In my state, a few days ago, southern part of the state, it wasn't a doubling of their premiums, it was a quadrupling of their premiums. So at a time when we are already paying the highest prices in the world for health care by far, people are going to look at these bills and say, it's insane. And again, in Vermont, we're seeing now families going to be paying 45, 50%. I say to my friend from Oregon, 50% of their incomes on health care. How do you survive? When you're spending 50% of your income on health care, what do you have left for food or for anything else? What the connection is between authoritarianism and oligarchy is that these billionaires not only don't want to pay their fair share of taxes, they want tax breaks. Not only do they want to, with impunity, be able to break unions and throw workers out on the street, but they want, in many ways, what existed in the 1700s, what our forefathers fought against. They want the divine right to rule. All right? King of England thought that they had a God-given divine right to rule. These guys think that as multi-billionaires, they have the right to do anything. No accountability. They're bringing forth hundreds of billions of dollars right now investing in AI and robotics, which will, if we don't deal with it, have a devastating impact on the working class of this country. Yeah, you're going to have more factories in America, but you know what? Ain't going to be human beings working in those factories. Elon Musk, I don't agree with Musk on anything. But just the other day, I think Musk made it clear. He said, hey, AI and robotics is going to do away with jobs. Not going to be any jobs. You don't need any jobs in America. Well, that's great if you're worth a couple $100 billion, but you don't have a job and you're a working class person. How do you feed your family? How do you afford health care? Think anybody in the White House is staying up nights worrying about you when you lose your job? I don't think so. So we are in an unprecedented and difficult moment in American history. And I want to thank the 7 million people just this Saturday all over this country who came out and said loudly and clearly, no more kings. And we're going to keep that movement going. And I don't care if you are a conservative, a progressive, a socialist, a Democrat, whatever you may be. We understand that what makes our country great is, in fact, freedom, the right to dissent, the right to argue. And I don't care what your politics are, that's what we've got to maintain. And I want to conclude simply by saying, expressing very great deal of disappointment at my Republican colleagues, with few exceptions. The vast majority of Republicans in the Senate and the House are not authoritarians. They believe in the Constitution. They believe in the rule of law. But they, at this moment at least, with very few exceptions, simply do not have the courage to stand up to this authoritarian president. How many times has the senator from Oregon and me heard that our Republican friends believe in small government, in federalism, in the right of the local government? They don't want that big, bad federal government overruling the needs of cities and towns and states. And now you got a president of the United States sending federal troops into Portland, Oregon, and Chicago, Illinois, usurping the rights of Congress, threatening to impeach judges who rule against them. So this is a very difficult, unprecedented moment in our history, but I have every confidence that when the American people stand together and they do not let Trump and his friends divide us up by the color of our skin or where we were born or our sexual orientation, when we stand together, defend the Constitution, defend American democracy, we will prevail and we will defeat authoritarianism and we will defeat oligarchy. And I would simply ask my friend from Oregon a profound question. Do you agree with me?
Thank you to my colleague from Vermont, and I appreciate your points, and I do share them, yes, and you expressed them thoroughly and passionately, and thank you for your advocacy. And I see that my colleague from Virginia is on the floor. Would my colleague from Virginia consider asking a question?
Mr. President, will the senator from Oregon yield for a question?
I will yield for a question, yes.
And Mr. President, I'm actually going to ask two questions. I'm going to tell a story about something that's happened recently in Virginia and ask my colleague from Oregon what he thinks about it. And then I'm going to hand my colleague from Oregon a picture and ask my colleague what he thinks about that. To begin with the story, and the story deals with a topic that may not seem that sexy or something, but that I think is pretty important: U.S. attorneys and the rule of law. Virginia has two United States attorneys, Western District of Virginia and the Eastern District of Virginia. And those two U.S. attorneys who were put in office by President Trump have both recently been forced out of office because they wouldn't engage in political persecution of Donald Trump's enemies. Let me describe the situation to my colleague from Oregon. When the Trump administration began, the two U.S. attorneys who had been recommended by President Biden and voted on, confirmed by the Senate, both stepped down, as is the norm. The Trump administration then elevated in the Eastern District of Virginia an individual by the name of Eric Siebert. First, the Department of Justice appointed him for 120 days, and then that was followed by an appointment by the judges of the court. But his initial appointment into the role was by the Trump administration. Mr. Siebert began his career as a D.C. police officer and then served for 15 years as a prosecutor in one of the most important positions in the U.S. attorney's offices nationally. Senator Warner and I interviewed candidates, and we recommended Eric Siebert to the Trump administration. So they had put him in as the interim, and then he had been confirmed as the acting. We recommended him to the Trump administration. The Trump administration nominated him, and the Judiciary Committee, in an overwhelmingly bipartisan vote, reported him to the floor of the Senate. But before the Senate could act on that bipartisan vote by the Judiciary Committee, Eric Siebert was forced out of office. And he was forced out of office because he refused to prosecute, to indict former FBI Director Jim Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James. He said there was no evidence to support an indictment in the case, and so this individual who had been put in office by the Trump administration was forced out. In the Western District of Virginia, which covers more of Virginia's landmass but a smaller portion of the Virginia population, Senator Merkley, we had a process like you do in Oregon, and Senator Warner and I recommended two candidates to the White House, and one was a gentleman named Todd Gilbert. Todd Gilbert was a Republican member of our House of Delegates from Shenandoah County, Virginia, who was the leader of the Republican caucus in our House of Delegates, a strong supporter of President Trump's, and he had even been Speaker of the House when the Republicans held the majority in the Virginia General Assembly. A very solid individual, very much with Republican bona fides in supporting President Trump. But he applied to be the U.S. attorney. He had been a local prosecutor, but also a local defense attorney. President Trump installed him as the interim and nominated him for the position. Before the Senate Judiciary Committee could take him up, the Trump Department of Justice pressured Todd Gilbert to fire the chief deputy who had been the deputy in that office leading criminal prosecutions during multiple presidential terms. Todd Gilbert refused to do it, and Todd Gilbert was forced to resign as a result. Subsequent reporting by the New York Times laid out the facts that we believe to be true, that the Trump administration wanted to push out the assistant because the assistant was unwilling to issue indictments that were political in nature against Trump's political enemies, and for that reason, they pressured Todd Gilbert to fire his assistant. Todd Gilbert, who had given up his position in the Virginia General Assembly to take this position, within a month, walked out of the U.S. Attorney's Office rather than succumb to a politically motivated firing of a longtime dedicated prosecutor. In 2 instances, the chief federal law enforcement officials in Virginia, installed in their positions by the Trump administration, were forced to leave because they wouldn't agree to bend the knee and genuflect to a politically motivated persecution campaign. And so my question to my colleague is, you're talking about creeping authoritarianism. What does it say when the executive makes moves on law enforcement officials, Republican law enforcement officials, because they won't bend the knee and politically persecute people against whom there is no actionable claim?
I thank so much my colleague from Virginia for laying out this story, which has been quite presented because of its extraordinary nature. To have U.S. attorneys basically fired on short order because they stood up for the principle of the rule of law, rather than agreeing to be part of a political persecution or prosecution team. And I must say they're candidates to go up on my wall of heroes. And I so respect. Now here, as you said with Todd, he wasn't coming from the blue side of the aisle. And he wasn't just a newbie to the House. He was the leader of the House Republicans, which meant when they were in charge, he was the speaker. Now, I was a speaker as well. I always have a little affection for the speakers, but I know how difficult it can be to run a chamber. And so you have to be deeply, deeply connected to your colleagues in your caucus as you manage that process. So this individual, just by that resume, clearly was coming with a set of values deeply rooted in the Republican Party. But the value he didn't have was to screw over innocent people. And thank goodness we still have people willing to stand up for justice. Not, if you will, injustice. Because that's what we're seeing. And we see it in the form of the enemies list that the president is going after. But we also see it, and more hidden normally, the firing of individuals, the tossing of individuals who aren't willing to take a loyalty test. Their loyalty is to the Constitution, not to the president. So I think it says a tremendous amount about how far we are into the authoritarian state. This is kind of standard operating procedure for an authoritarian. You mentioned kind of creeping authoritarianism. I would say we're on full stream authoritarianism because so much is happening in terms of the firing of employees who are failing the loyalty test, the decimating of programs at the whim of the president rather than by laws being passed here, the ignoring of laws that apply to the executive, like the fact that you can't fire inspector generals unless they for cause in 30 days, the attack on due process and free speech and free press, the weaponization in general of the Justice Department, of which this is kind of a facet of it, and then the effort to get court decisions that enable the president to deploy the military in the streets when there is no insurrection, no rebellion, and no invasion. And this last piece, I think, is extraordinarily dangerous. Not yet an issue that has come to your home in Virginia, but it's come to Southern California and to D.C. and to Portland, Oregon, and to Chicago, Illinois, and there will be others, because the whole intent is to have the court decisions resolved that provide the precedent for deploying troops when and how the president wants, according to his definition of what a rebellion is or an insurrection is, as opposed to the reality. So there are no checks then on that use of military. So these are all so many things happening all at once. Remember, we are simply 9 months into this administration. Wow. I mean, it's breathtaking. The team had to have a careful plan, ready to roll with things that were going to be done every day. And that is why they had Project 2025. That is why they have Russ Vogt at the head of OMB, being the engineer of that Trumpian train. We're in big trouble, so we're ringing the alarm bells. You're ringing the alarm bells. The people, and they're 7 million strong on the weekend, we're ringing the alarm bells. And the biggest demonstration in U.S. history on a single day. But that is so important right now if we're going to save our republic. And thank you for being a core part of the rescue team.
Let me tell
I yield for a possible additional question.
Mr. President, might the senator from Oregon yield for another question?
Yes, I will. For a question.
Thank you. And I'll tell a quick story, and then I'm going to hand you this picture now, because my question is going to be for you to describe it. But I'll tell a quick story on the authoritarianism front, and this is a very Virginia story. And then I'm going to ask my colleague to describe the picture that I've just handed him. So Virginia is an unusual state. 50 states have mottos. All states have mottos. Almost all states have mottos that are positive. Excelsior, onward, to the stars through adversity. My favorite, because it's so random, positive motto is Michigan. It says, it's Latin, but the translation is, if you seek a pleasant peninsula, look about you. How random. I wasn't looking for a peninsula, but I would rather it be pleasant than unpleasant. Virginia's is the only motto that's not positive. The Virginia motto was designed by the framers of the Virginia Constitution, who were meeting in Williamsburg when the framers of the American Constitution were meeting in, the Declaration of Independence was being drafted and voted on in Philadelphia. The Declaration voted on in Philadelphia July 4, 1776. July 5, 1776, in Williamsburg, the Virginia B team that weren't in Philadelphia, they did 4 really cool things. They passed the first Virginia Constitution. They enacted the first Virginia Bill of Rights, which became a model for the National Bill of Rights. They elected Patrick Henry, the first governor of Virginia. But the 4th thing they did was they had a 4-member committee appointed that spent 4 days in the library at William & Mary to design a state seal. And the state seal, which I'm wearing, I wear this all the time, is an unusual one. It is a woman Amazon representing virtue standing atop a deposed monarch whose crown has fallen off. And the state motto, the only one that isn't a positive, the Virginia motto, is a warning. It's a rebuke. It's Latin, sic semper tyrannis, thus be it always to tyrants. And the framers picked the future verb tense. They didn't say down with tyrants, we don't like tyrants, we've defeated tyrants. They used the future verb tense because they believed that tyranny wasn't a form of government, it was a fact of human nature. It was a fact of human nature that would not go away, and we would always need virtue to be able to defeat tyranny. And so as you're talking about authoritarianism and where we are, I'm just reminded of the fact that Virginians predicted in 1776 that the nation would need to always be on guard against tyranny. And in the formation of the Constitution, and my colleague has done a great job of looking at provisions of the Constitution, we invested a lot of power in the hands of an executive, but then we put checks, Congress, the courts, a free press. You shouldn't go to war without a vote of Congress. The appropriations power was for Congress, not the president. We put all these checks in place to stop the reality of tyranny. And as we round the corner into 250 years of American democracy, we are a nation looking in the mirror and asking ourselves the question of whether we still believe in democracy over tyranny. Do we still believe it? In 1776, 30% of Americans were for monarchy. When we tell the story of the revolution, it wasn't that 100% of Americans believed in democracy. 30% were for tyranny and monarchy. It was what they knew, or they had a financial tie, or a family tie to England, or maybe they were worried that democracy would be too messy. It wasn't a foregone conclusion that democracy would be the choice. Every generation has to answer the question for itself. Do we still prefer a democracy over tyranny? And as we face this 250th anniversary of the nation's birth, we're confronted with that. I've handed my colleague a photo. I had hoped to have it on a poster, but the photo was taken today. And I didn't have time to turn it into a poster. But I want to ask my colleague from Oregon to describe what it is you see in that photograph.
Well, thank you for the question. I thought when you were going to hand me this, I was going to have a Rorschach test or something of that nature. But I knew within seconds what this was. As soon as I realized it was machinery and not parts of a bridge. But this is the demolition at the White House to prepare for some $300 million ballroom. At least that's what I'm nominating as my answer. And I would yield you a question if you would like to follow up.
I would love to ask a follow-up question if the senator would allow.
I will indeed. Question.
You know what a metaphor is. A metaphor is something that not only stands for itself, but it stands for something else. As you look at that picture of the White House being demolished today, at the very time as you were standing on this floor talking about authoritarianism hurting the institutions that were put in place 250 years ago, what is your feeling about the true significance of this demolition project going on at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue?
You're asking such a cerebral and philosophical question here as I'm in the 20-whatever hour days. But here we have evidence of the president tearing down a symbol of our republic and building a symbol that is really a symbol about authoritarian power, about a government that serves the rich. Just the fact that we're spending money on a $300 million ballroom, which I can't even imagine how it could cost that much, when at the same time the president will not come as requested by the minority leader in the House and the minority leader in the Senate and sit down and work on, and I'm sure they're willing to go to him, and sit down and work on the fact that we are facing 20 million people who are going to have their health care costs doubled. But instead of addressing that, the president's tearing down part of the symbol of our republic, a president, and building a symbol of a king.
With that, Mr. President, I yield, and I thank my colleague from Oregon for this important conversation and for your stamina and patriotism.
My stamina is getting a little shaky. Oh, and I see my colleague from California standing behind me, so I will get out of the way. And I would ask if you would care to ask a question.
Yes, would the senator yield for a question?
I will yield for a question. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman for yielding and for your extraordinary speech and all that you have elucidated today, and for your powerful advocacy on behalf of our democracy. I think there are any number of signs of when a democracy is in trouble, when a country is descending into a kind of dictatorship. And books have been written about this subject. No one account, I think, can comprise all of the elements of the deterioration of a democracy, but there are certain telltale signs that I think we are seeing all too clearly. And my question goes to some of the things that we are witnessing that I think are hallmarks of the decline of a democracy, and that ought to be sounding a three-alarm fire for the American people. And let me begin with a few of them. First is the misuse of the military at home and abroad. When a president begins to use a military for impermissible purposes, when a president deploys American forces in violation of the law to American cities, when a president assembles top leadership, flag officers, generals, admirals, and tells them that our cities are to be military training grounds, that there is an enemy within, it is as sure as anything a sign of a democracy in trouble, of a democracy in decline. When troops are repelling from Black Hawk helicopters, not in Somalia, but in Chicago, it is the most visible sign of a democracy in trouble. This is, as we all know, in violation of the law which prohibits the use of our military for domestic law enforcement purposes. Likewise, the misuse of the military abroad without the authorization of Congress, another sign of the deterioration of our democracy, when a president arrogates to himself the power to blow ships up in the Caribbean or now in the Pacific without any authority, in violation of law and constitution. It is another sign of the president arrogating the military power to himself, to the person of himself, not to the Constitution, not to his core responsibilities, but to himself. Number two, among the dozen or so most virulent signs of the decline of our democracy, of the risk of an authoritarian regime taking hold in this country, are the attacks on our universities. We see this in Hungary and elsewhere, when rulers start to attack the independence, the academic freedom of our universities. It is a sure sign of a democracy in trouble when a president tries to dictate by withholding federal funds, the lifeblood of research universities, withholds those funds unless an academic institution agrees to adopt its cultural agenda or to fire certain faculty or to allow it to have some kind of a monitor, some kind of a big brother overseeing what takes place in our universities. It is a sign of a democracy in decline. Number three, when an administration, when a ruler goes after the right of representation by attacking lawyers, law firms, legal professionals, and saying, "Thou shalt not represent this cause which is deeply unpopular to me. You shall not take on this client who is antagonistic to me. You shall not hire this lawyer who is a personal enemy of mine." That is antithetical to the history of our democracy and all democracies. John Adams, prior to becoming president, took on one of the most unpopular cases in American history, representing British soldiers who participated in the Boston Massacre. And why did he do that? Why take on such an unpopular cause? Because he understood the importance to a democracy of the right of representation. Number four of the signs that our democracy is in deep, deep trouble is the abuse of the Justice Department to go after the president's enemies and to protect his friends. It is in actions like in the state of Virginia, the firing of a U.S. attorney who believes that a prosecution is not warranted, notwithstanding the personal injunction of the president that thou must prosecute these people. That prosecutor is fired and another brought in to implement the president's will to go after his enemies. But it is also likewise a sign of the loss of democracy when the powers of the Justice Department can be used to protect the president's friends. When a Justice Department can be told, "You shall not look further into the $50,000 in bribe money taken from a top White House official. Close down that investigation. You shall look no further into the corruption of the mayor of New York. Close down that investigation because that mayor is useful to the administration politically." That is as sure a sign as anything that we no longer have an independent Justice Department, but one in the thrall of the White House. Regulatory power and threats to try to take off the air a comedian or two comedians. It is a sure sign of the loss of press freedom. And equally, we see in other repressive regimes an effort to concentrate power, to concentrate the media itself in the hands of friendly oligarchs, or to create a kind of state-run media, which we are deeply at risk of, and we see in the development of TikTok and the coercive power of the government to decide who the future owners of TikTok will be to make sure that they are of the same political persuasion as the president, or we see reflected in the oligarchic control of Twitter, now X, or we see in organizations that are buying up stations like Sinclair and using its mass power for the purpose of censorship. Next, in a declining democracy, in a budding autocracy, we see the demonization of vulnerable communities. And what could be more visible in America today than the demonization of immigrant communities by this administration? The demonization of the other, the false portrait of people who come to this country as all murderers and rapists and drug smugglers. The demonization of some of the most vulnerable people in America, also in the LGBT community and the trans community. We see this time and time again in history, in countries becoming dictatorships, that they build their power on the backs of people they dehumanize. We're seeing at home another powerful sign of a budding authoritarianism, of a growing authoritarianism, and that is the use of propaganda, the use of taxpayer money for propaganda. You see banners with the president's glowering face now on public buildings in violation of law. You see Kristi Noem doing Hollywood-looking produced ads that are played at airports, falsely blaming Democrats for the shutdown, political propaganda paid for by you, the taxpayer, or highly produced immigration videos featuring Kristi Noem thanking the president, more political propaganda. Another sign of the decline of our democracy, of the growth of our authoritarian regime, is the corrupt use of government power for self-enrichment. This we saw from the very first days of this administration. The meme coin dinners, in which the premises of the White House are used, but private donors are encouraged to buy the president's meme coin, a cut of which the president gets, using the power, the prestige of that office, sometimes even the venue of that office, to enrich himself. The receipt of aircraft, $400 million aircraft from Qatar, a nation that has a keen interest in U.S. policy. The president acquiring a plane in plain violation of the Emoluments Clause, soliciting private donors for ballrooms, the real estate deals in the Gulf, the rampant conflicts of interest, the crypto money coming in from the Gulf to the first family, the use of government power and position for corruption and self-enrichment. Another powerful sign of a democracy in decline is the usurpation of Congress's power of the purse. The illegal withholding of funding, the impoundment of funding, the illegal rescission of funding, the illegal termination of grants, and I would say beyond that, the mass firing of federal employees, the lawless firing of federal employees, the use of Congress's power to appropriate money, one of the most important powers, arguably the most important power we have, now taken by the administration, and without a fight in this body. Certainly not a bipartisan fight. That is surely a sign that we are losing our democracy. The undermining of elections and voting. Another key ingredient in dictators around the world cementing their position in power is the undermining of the foundational right to vote. We see it in its various forms now. We see it in this push to engage in gerrymandering around the country, but we see it in closing down of polling stations in urban areas. We see it in efforts to suppress the vote of certain communities. We see it in the purging of voter rolls. We see it in affirmative efforts to discourage people from voting. We see it in the demonization of election workers, the interference with election boards. And finally, although the list is much longer, I would end with this. The attack on truth itself, the attack on facts, the attack on science, the purging of people from our scientific agencies, the rampant falsehood, the fire hose of falsehood coming out of the White House and our agencies, daily provable, palpable falsehood, eroding the very idea of truth and fact. If you can persuade people that nothing is true, then what are we to use to decide who should govern? If there is no shared experience, then how do we decide what policy should be? How do we avoid just falling back on political tribe or worse, political violence? If there is no truth, if there is no fact, if there is no accountability. And so, Senator Merkley, I thank you for shedding a light on the risk, the risk to our precious democracy, the risk to this incredible inheritance from our founders. Because part and parcel of saving our republic, part and parcel of saving this country is to understand the dangers so that we can confront them. Future generations are going to ask what we did in this hour when our democracy was most vulnerable, when our parents and their parents went off to world wars to protect our democracy. Our task is far easier on the one hand, but no less important on the other. And so I ask you, are you seeing these same signs I'm seeing of the danger to our democracy, of the degradation of our democracy, and what do you feel we can do to save this inheritance?
Well, I so appreciate the question from my colleague from California. And I must say this was a pretty comprehensive list you put forward. And I was checking them off in the order that issues that I've been raising over the many hours through the night last night. And but I think the one that I didn't have that I actually agree with very much is your final point, the fire hose of falsehoods. Because we are just adrift in a sea of misinformation and disinformation. And added into that toxic brew is a whole lot of just basic propaganda in a place that doesn't belong. And that we see, if you go out to the Portland airport, you will not hear the tape that Noam once played, because she wanted it played in airports all around the country, and a group of airports, led first by Portland, Oregon, said, no, it's breaking the law, it's breaking the Hatch Act, it's breaking the Anti-Lobbying Act, it's breaking some other act on the list. And in this situation where the administration does not care what the law says, the philosophy is we are the unitary executive, we're in charge, and we can do whatever the hell we want, take us to court if you don't like it, attitude. And then we see the deliberate crushing of rights, and we see the deliberate grabbing of the power of the purse from Congress. The difference between an authoritarian government, and there's many differences, but one way to describe it, authoritarian government and democracy, is in the democracy, representatives of the people decide what the programs are, how they're funded, and how they'll be run. And in an authoritarian, all those powers of what are the programs, how much money will go into them, how they run, transitions to the executive, the all-powerful executive. So we can see every time we hear Trump or his cabinet members saying, I'm canceling that grant, I'm defunding that program, because it doesn't act consistent with the priorities of this administration. That's an authoritarian statement. And we are deep into this authoritarian crisis. The poster behind me says, ring the alarm bells. I thank you for helping to ring these alarm bells in a very cogent and extensive way. I thank the 7 million people who went out and protested on Saturday for ringing the alarm bells. Because what we know is if we do not confront tyranny in its first year, and if we do not find a way to have a strong rebuttal in the next election, then it becomes entrenched. And it is our responsibility, our oath to the Constitution, to not let that happen. Thank you. And I notice we have a colleague from Vermont on the floor. If the colleague might be interested in asking a question. I would yield for a question.
How are you managing to do this? You've been up all night, and your staff too. It is really, really quite extraordinary.
Well, thank you for that question. I am on the verge of
And the staff.
falling over, but I've got an hour more before we're going to wrap up this effort. I am so pleased that so many have been able to come from the caucus and help ring the alarm bells, because this is the most perilous moment for our republic since the Civil War. And never did I expect it to be in my time. I thought, yes, we argue over housing policy and how can we best have a decent home and a decent community. And yes, we argue over education policy and how can it be a pathway for every child to have a full and productive life. All these foundations. Oh, another question. I would yield for another question. Yes, I would.
All right, well.
Make it a long one.
I'll make it a longish one, but I want to join in my colleagues in expressing to you our gratitude for this incredible physical effort that reflects not just your intellectual engagement, but your deep passion and the care you have for the Oregonians that you have been serving so well for so long. It's really been, just for me, a wonderful opportunity being a new member of the Senate. Along with Senator Schiff, I know you feel the same way, to be working with somebody like the senators from Oregon, who's just honest and true and totally grounded in your commitment to the people that you serve, in the Constitution that all of us serve. It's just a gratifying experience for us to be your colleague. You know, one thing that I want to talk about was tariffs and who has the authority to impose tariffs and what the implications are. Because what I'm seeing from selling to markets they have had. And the second thing I noticed, and I really am interested in this because rural America is the heart of America. You know, the wonderful community values folks have, family values, hard work, service. We've got a billionaire who's the Secretary of the Treasury, and my understanding, I don't know how you, I guess if you're a billionaire, you'll own lots of things in lots of different places, but he apparently owns lots of farmland out in the West. But his major new initiative is to take $40 billion of our money to bail out the Argentine peso. So maybe you can explain to me how that's going to help our Midwest farmers. A stronger bailed out peso from Secretary Besant, and how the Besant policy on tariffs is going to give any kind of lifeline to those family farms that have been so much part of our heritage, who do so much for the well-being of our country, and whose prosperity is so essential to the well-being of our whole country. Farmers like to feed people. They like to work hard. They don't want to bail out. They don't want a handout. And we've got the tariff policies that are wrecking their markets And then we've got a bailout that's going to Argentina that's going to further erode the ability of our farmers to sell their product because, oh, by the way, the Argentinian farmers are now going into the markets we're helping them create that have been opened up as a result of denying access to those markets for our Midwest farmers. So perhaps you could explain to me how this makes sense.
Well, I appreciate the question from my colleague from Vermont. And I must say soybeans have come up several times today, as has Argentina. And this is so troubling. Now, I'll tell you, when I met with my Farm Bureau, everyone has a little bit of queasiness, even if tariffs haven't touched them yet. But the tariffs are changing all the time. And how might it suddenly affect the market if another tariff changes or the input or so forth? And everyone in the agricultural world is terrified that if they lose their market, even temporarily, those relationships deteriorate. New relationships are forged. It's hard to get people back. If you've let people down once, then what happens next? And so this situation, this double deal, I guess I'll call it, with Argentina, where by us, well, having a trade war with China, so China doesn't buy a single bean. You said not a single bushel, and I've heard, yep, nothing, nada. And so Senator Murray of Washington was down here saying, we've got all these beans that normally travel through Washington State to get exported. Where the hell are they going to be stored? I don't know. But what I do know is that a lot of folks aren't going to sell them, may not have a place to store them. I look forward to learning more about what's going to happen to this massive crop that there's no customer for because China went to Argentina. And then you mentioned the second part of the Argentina deal, that the president says, you know what, I want to bail out this far-right government down there because they're in trouble, and we don't want to let a far-right government be in trouble, and $20 billion and maybe $40 billion. Think of how much money that is. That's $100 for every single person in the United States of America. You know, if I went door to door in Oregon and personally asked everybody, would you like to give $100 to Argentina? You know how many takers I'd have? I think I would get 0 takers. And by the way, where is the legislation that gives the president the power to give $20 billion or $40 billion to Argentina? I haven't looked it up yet. I'm going to look it up. But I think it's exactly a feature of an authoritarian government that he wants to self out a fellow authoritarian government, but with a twist. And the twist is that apparently a group of well-placed colleagues, maybe friends of the Treasury Secretary, I believe I may have read, I won't say that definitively, they bought up some of the debt in Argentina. And they bought it at a discount, is my understanding. And again, I have not double-checked this, so I'm saying it with some caution. But what happens when you do that, and then there's a bailout, and you get face value? Let's say you paid 25 cents on the dollar, and you get face value after bailout, and you make 400% return. Well, that's great for the riches of whoever they are, that in America, that Trump wants to help out. I would yield, it has to be in the form of a question, but I would yield for a question.
So here's my question. Is this really a bailout for the financiers on Wall Street who bought this debt at 20 cents on the dollar, but may get paid $1 on a dollar? Or is this just flat out enrichment? They didn't lose. They're winning as other people suffer. So is this really a bailout or just a flat out, hey fellas, here's $40 billion. I love you, Donald Trump.
Well, thank you for that question. And I must say, it reminds me of a town hall. Because every now and then I realize I'm way over my head in what I actually know to be the facts. So I'm going to stop before I dig a digger hole because I have not personally researched it, read up on it. I've heard a variety of comments, almost in passing, from colleagues who are so disturbed about this arrangement, disturbed about what's going to happen to soybeans, disturbed that China's buying them from Argentina, disturbed that so we're having to bail out to Argentina, and disturbed that they have heard that a lot of that money may come back to some very rich people in the United States of America. But I do not know the details, and I'm going to leave it as a bit of a conjecture. When we talk soon, I'll have the answers.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'll yield back to the senator.
Thank you. I notice my colleague from Illinois has returned to the floor. If he would like to, I'd be happy to entertain a question, should he have one.
First, I thank my colleague from Oregon for his endurance and determination. Hang in there. You're bringing up a critical issue and subject for America at a critical moment. And I'd like to return to an issue we discussed this morning when I was visiting, and that's the issue of the militarization of our federal government and its impact on states like yours, of Oregon, and mine, of Illinois. What I'm finding as I read the newspaper accounts is that the ICE operation from the Department of Homeland Security in Illinois continues to intimidate people who live in the city, in their neighborhoods and all around, and really bring fear. There are parts of the city of Chicago, Little Village and Pilsen are the ones most well known.
I'm going to interrupt you for just a moment. Because the protocol team is not sure whether you asked me if I would yield for a question.
That's a legitimate point. Will you yield for a question?
I will
through
yield
the
for
chair?
a question. Thank you.
So the point I'm trying to make is that there are areas of the city of Chicago, and I'm sure in your state of Oregon, where the intimidation factor has reached a point where people are worried about literally going to church, going to work, taking their kids to school. It's a genuine problem. Just last week, an individual took his child to daycare, left the motor running in his car, and took the little toddler into daycare, came out the door and was arrested and detained and removed from that scene specifically while the motor was still running in his car. That's the kind of thing that is happening. It isn't as if they're targeting criminals. They're after people who look like they're Hispanic. And there are many who live in our city, and I'm glad to have them. They're wonderful people. So I'd like to ask in your state what kind of intimidation, if any, has taken place through this military operation of the president?
Well, thank the senator from Illinois for the question. And as you're telling this story, I was thinking about a story from Oregon in which a woman who has been there for a long time, she has legal status in the United States. Her mother visits from Honduras, and her sister lives in Canada. So there is a park on the border between Washington State and Canada where people can go into the park, meet, and they have to leave by the same entry they came in. And they've done this before, and so her mother gets to be with her, and then with her sister, the three of them, and 4 children, 7-year-old triplets and a 9-year-old, I believe. And so, and the children are U.S. citizens. So they do what they've done before. They go up to meet the Canadian sister in this park, and while they're hugging, she gets arrested. Arrested why? For smuggling her sister into the U.S., but they're in this park that is set up for that purpose. And she is still being held. The children were released, and they are with a family friend. But the grandmother was released, the mother's mother. And but the mother, Jackie, the mother of the 4 American children, she's still being held. And we keep protesting, writing, calling, and she's still being held. The case against her was dropped. Why? Because you can't arrest somebody for hugging in a park set up for that purpose. This is my understanding of the case. But think about how that story says everyone's at risk all the time. Everyone's at risk. And so there is fear and trepidation. And individuals who have their documentation are afraid that they may make a move that may lead to some extended family member or someone else who has documentation being arrested, just like this woman had documentation. And so it's a regime of fear. And the argument Trump made was that when someone is here and undocumented and they do a violent act, they're going to be deported. And I don't think many Americans would argue with that. But we should also recognize that our immigrants commit violent acts at a lower rate than native-born Americans. Like portraying immigrants with this false story of criminals, rapists, murderers, and so forth is simply, well, to quote a district judge on a different topic, untethered to the facts. And we are in a deeply disturbing period where more children are being separated, communities are being terrorized, and I think how you have brought forward time and time again that we needed to resolve the status for Dreamers in a more solid way and put bills forward, and we just fell short time, and how many times? 6 times? I'm not sure, or more. And this body can't even come together and address children brought here through no fault of their own, who know no other country, who speak no other language, who grew up here and are productive citizens. Many of them that when we first started, I was first aware of it, so long ago that they might have been little kids. Now they may be out of high school, out of college, fully employed in the community, and still we haven't resolved their status so they can be kind of feel fully productive members of our community.
If the Senator would yield.
I will yield for a question.
Over the course of my service in the Senate, one of the things that I was proudest of, still proud of, was the formation of the so-called Gang of 8, 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats, who sat down to write a comprehensive immigration reform bill. Senator McCain led the effort on the Republican side. Senator Schumer joined me with others on the Democratic side, and we produced a measure that had support of business and labor and Democrats and Republicans, brought it to the floor of the United States Senate and passed it with over 60 votes. It was a glorious day. It was a day of great celebration. What was it all about? It was all about the 11 million undocumented people in the United States coming forward and registering with this government, who they are, where they live, and they pay a fine for coming to this country without documentation. They then don't automatically become citizens, but they are allowed to work. They wouldn't be deported, and they can live a normal life paying their taxes and doing what people who live in this country do normally. It was an attempt to try to regularize the situation, to account for the 11 million, and to say that that was going to be an accounting which would give us some stability in this country on the issue of immigration. And the fact was, it would have done just that. And unfortunately, it was never taken up by the Republican leadership in the House of Representatives. So we passed it here in the Senate. It included the DREAM Act, and it was a step forward. I contrast it today to what we're faced with. Full-scale battles and war going over immigration in cities across this country. It's unnecessary. There are ways to resolve this fairly, humanely, and in an American fashion. And I hope the senator from Oregon agrees with me. It's time for us to sit down and do this. Hiring more ICE agents is not going to resolve the issue of immigration. Having a law that is enforceable and rational and humane and American in its nature is the best way as far as I'm concerned. And I ask the senator for his reaction.
Well, thank you, Senator. I do not only agree, but I so admire what you accomplished, and it's so frustrating. Why can't we accomplish that again? And I know one of our members worked hard with a colleague across the aisle to do a bill that may have been a slimmer version, and President Trump, then candidate Trump, said, don't take that immigration bill forward last year, because he wanted to keep this as an election issue. If people want to keep chaos rather than to solve problems, how are we to address a better path forward for our nation, a more productive path? So I hope what you accomplish can be reinvented. I'm not sure that I have any confidence that it is possible, maybe harder now than it was then, but let's try. And you have my full backing in that effort.
I'd like to just make one last comment, if
And
I
I'll
can,
yield for a question.
in the nature of a question. Just a few feet away from where we're in the chamber is my Capitol office, and on my credenza behind my desk is my mother's naturalization certificate for all to see. I'm a proud immigrant. She came to this country at the age of 2. Her mother did not speak English, but brought 3 children on a boat from Germany to Baltimore and ultimately to Illinois, where I grew up and my mother spent her life. It was an indication of the American dream as far as I'm concerned. Her son not only got a government job, but was elected to the Senate. And so good things happen. But I think it's a story of immigration, a story repeated over and over again by families, that coming to this country determined to succeed makes us a better nation and always has. Has a senator run into that in the state of Oregon?
Well, I must say, Senator, I don't think there is an individual that we have in the Senate who is not the descendant of immigrants. And so shouldn't we all be able to identify with our family stories and bring those to bear to solve this challenge and actually restore a framework? I think about, like, just let me take one piece of this. The process for being able to have an asylum hearing has a backlog of about 6 years. Well, that's a piece that we can find a rational way to address that. The Dreamers, we can find a rational path to bring the Dreamers fully into our society as you have laid out in the past. We can proceed to, I think, find a deal on border security, what we pay. But there are many pieces that will never get solved unless people are sitting down like you did with your Gang of 8, bringing people together and say, let's iron this out. And so that is my hope and prayer.
In nature of a question, I asked the senator from Oregon, is he aware of the fact that we have approximately 700 immigration judges facing that backlog you just described, and the Trump administration has dismissed 100 of them? So instead of adding more judges so we can expedite the hearings and resolve them, the opposite has been the case. Was the senator aware of that?
I was not aware of that, no. And that's insanity.
It certainly is. I'd also asked the senator, when it comes to
I yield in the nature of question.
When it comes to the issue of due process, the question is whether or not we can in this country offer due process to the people who are asking for their fate to be resolved. That has been part of our Constitution, applying not only to citizens, but those who are in our country petitioning to become citizens. Does the senator agree with me that due process is a critical part of our democracy?
Absolutely.
Well, we face this reality now with children. I just described it earlier, and this is the question I would ask you is this.
I yield for the question.
Does the senator believe that these unaccompanied children need to have humane treatment at all times? You told the story earlier of going down to the border and watching what happened under previous administrations. Would the senator recount that story at this point?
Well, yes. I think you asked me to recount the story. And the story involved the fact that I read a speech by Attorney General Sessions. And Attorney General Sessions was delivering this speech at, I think it was called Freedom Park in Southern California on the border. And as I read the speech, I said out loud to people around me, it sounds like he's planning to separate children deliberately from their parents in order to have that trauma be a deterrent for people coming. And I said, there is no way any American administration, not blue, not red, would ever deliberately harm children as a political policy strategy. And a member of my team said, there's one way to find out. Go down to the border. And I checked, and I had that weekend free, so I was down to the border. And I go into this warehouse, and in this warehouse, there are all of these, basically what we'd call in Oregon, cyclone fence cages, wire cages. And I stop in front of one of them, and it has a group of boys lining up from the smallest to the tallest. And the smallest was just knee-high to the grasshopper, as we say, just a little tyke, maybe 4 years old. And I see these kids looking out across the warehouse because in other cages inside that warehouse were groups of women or men, and my impression is they were looking to see Where did my mother go? Where did my father go? Where is my sister at? And I said to the Customs and Border Protection agent, I said, were these children separated from their parents? And he said, yes. And I said, where do you do that? He said, we bring the family in through that door. The door was maybe 25 feet away. And we say, children, come with me. Parents, go with that person. And boom, separated. And they stay separated. And what happened as that unfolded is administration, this is under Trump 1, said they were keeping careful records of the children to be able to have a reunion with their parents. But they were not. So we ended up with extraordinary efforts, including tons of volunteer lawyers and researchers trying to get children back unified with their parents. A few, 100, I believe, were never reconnected to their parents, could never be found. Whether they returned to a small village in a faraway country, I don't know. But it was profoundly disturbing. I went outside, and the press had a little huddle. They said, what do you see? And I said, children being separated from their parents. And, of course, this story immediately blew up. And then I went up the road. I heard that there were hundreds of boys being held in a former Walmart. And my team member was like, well, we asked, but we didn't get permission to get in. I said, well, let's go knock on the door. And so we go up, and he's doing a live feed. What's that called? Anyway, one of those social media, Facebook feeds. And I go up and I knock and I say, yes, who I am. And we were in the area and we heard there were a lot of operations here. Can you give us a tour? Can you have the executive director come out? And they got back to me. And by the way, since I was doing a live feed, and I said, call me on my phone number. My phone number went out to the entire world at that moment. And so I enjoyed having hundreds or thousands, it felt like thousands of people call for weeks about this. But they didn't come out. What they did is they called the police to have me arrested. And the police declined to arrest me, but did escort me and my staff member off the campus. They did not want there to be a tour. And I had been told there might be, I think it was 1,000 boys, and there were some almost 1,500 boys in this. And because of the publicity of that live feed, the next week the administration had to open it up to the press. And the week after that, I went back and took some legislators and saw it. But this vision of deliberately harming children in order to deter immigration, that's a horrific thing. And it did stop. The outcry was massive. It did stop, thank God. But all these other now circumstances people are being hurt in all kinds of ways right now. And as you were describing.
For another question, be my last question.
Yes, I'll yield for another question.
Is the senator aware of the fact that 2 weeks ago, ICE offered to children under the age of 18, and they were children, an option of $2,400 reward if they would leave the country and go back to their country of their birth? Children who are being asked to sign a contract to give up any claim to citizenship in the United States, and the $2,400 was available to an adult that they would identify in that country who would meet their airplane. With all of the trafficking that has been going on, it was a ridiculous idea to take children and ask them to make that decision and to give them a financial reward if they went along. Was the senator aware of that?
I had heard a reference to some kind of payment program being tested, but I didn't know the details.
That was the detail. I'm going to yield the floor and thank the senator from Oregon.
Thank you very much to my colleague from Illinois, and thank you for being a champion. And I noticed that we have a senator from Washington State. No, we do not. Do we have a senator? No, we do. We do have a senator from Oregon who has arrived. And would the senator from Oregon like to ask a question?
I know you have to ask permission. I just want to say that today has been an extraordinary day for Oregon and for the country. We look forward to continuing this discussion, and I thank, and would the senator yield?
Yes, thank you for the protocol. Was just checking. Thank you for asking me. And yes, I would yield for question.
would the senator be willing to continue this discussion in the days ahead? Because I think this has been extraordinary. It has begun to lay out the implications of what this is really all about in terms of authoritarianism. It's important for our state. It's an important debate for the country. Would the senator be willing to carry out further kind of discussions? Might not necessarily be here on the floor of the Senate, but elsewhere as well.
Thank you to my colleague, and as long as that discussion is not taking place in the hours I might be sleeping tonight, absolutely. And I do feel like this is so fundamental to our nation. That's why everyone who has come down to the floor, everyone here has asked a question today and made solid insights as they prepared their question. And we are collectively ringing the alarm bells. We're ringing the alarm bells because authoritarianism is not down the road or around the corner or next month or next year. It is here right now. And it has been so astounding to hear all the dimensions that have been highlighted by individual senators about how this tyranny is taking shape. And in every possible way around the world where authoritarians have developed a strategy, they are all being done here. It's like all of them. Rig the next election. Yes. And then proceed to pressure the newspapers. Yes. And pressure the broadcasters on what they can put out. Yes. And weaponize the Justice Department. They are doing it. And the list goes on and on. And for us in Oregon, certainly the one that is on everyone's mind is striving to have a pathway to legally send in the military when there is no rebellion, no insurrection, and no invasion. And that one terrifies me. That administration is hell-bent on getting judicial thumbs up, green light to be able to move troops where they want in this country when none of those things are happening.
My colleague has richly earned a few hours of sleep tonight, but I'm going to make sure that here in the Senate and across the country, people understand that this is the beginning of further discussion, not the end. And I want to thank my colleague for taking this time today to lay out what this is really all about in terms of this issue.
We still have 25 minutes. I'm checking. More colleagues would like to ask a question. The senator from Michigan. Would the senator from Michigan like to ask a question?
Well, I would. Thank you, Senator Merkley, for yielding to me. I do have a question for you. And certainly I appreciate all that you have been saying over all of these hours. You're right, we are in a real crisis here in this country.
Before you go any further, can you just say these magical words, would you yield for question? And I will say that I will yield for question.
Would you yield for a question?
I will yield for question, yes.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And again, thank you for bringing this to the attention of the American people in such an eloquent way. First, I'd just like to ask my colleague about how President Trump is pursuing dangerous and authoritarian practice of basically picking winners and losers in government. Clearly, he's like a king. As we've seen, he's picked winners and losers by illegally refusing to spend money that Congress has directed. He's picking winners and losers by withholding federal grant funding for programs, disaster relief, and medical research unless people basically bend the knee to his draconian demands. He's picking winners and losers by firing nonpartisan experts in programs that he doesn't like, and he's replacing them with people whose only qualifications that they're loyal to the president, only qualification he cares about. And in classic authoritarian playbook, he's covering all of this up by removing independent watchdogs that conduct oversight of executive functions. One of the most egregious examples of this power grab is the ongoing effort to illegally withhold funding that Congress has authorized and appropriated with bipartisan support for critical services. He's withholding it. President Trump froze funding that helped Michigan communities build new radio towers, prepare for natural disasters, and construct safe and modern infrastructure. And when the president breaks the law to give a windfall to some states and some communities, but not others, he is picking winners and losers. We've also seen how President Trump has picked winners and losers among the employees who work on critical government programs and protect our national security. President Trump has fired tens of thousands of nonpartisan federal employees, all because they carry out a function that the president simply doesn't like. And just this week, President Trump's Department of the Interior fired hundreds of workers who protect the health and safety of the Great Lakes, an economic and ecological gem for Michigan and all the states that surround those lakes. At every turn, President Trump has instituted policies that increase his power and sway so that he can more easily pick winners and losers among the federal workforce. He's made it so that only qualification for being a federal worker is someone who voted for you, whether or not you were voted for him, whether or not you actually do the job. In fact, he's taking us back to the spoils system of the 1800s. And it's not only politicizing our nonpartisan expert civil service, it's jeopardizing our government's ability to deliver crucial services to the American people. And like authoritarians in the past, President Trump doesn't want you to know about his illegal actions. So he's covering them up by undermining independent oversight at every single turn. And when it comes to picking winners and losers, we know that President Trump always chooses himself as the winner. He blatantly uses the office of the president to promote the sale of his own meme coins. He accepts large investments and gifts from foreign governments without regard for national security concerns or federal ethics laws. Meanwhile, his family and friends peddle influence and make deals to enrich themselves and the president. And what have all these efforts to enrich himself add up to? It's no surprise that his net worth has risen by $3 billion in the past year. So I'd like to ask my colleague from the great state of Oregon a question about what these decisions to basically unlawfully pick winners and losers, what do you believe that means for the future of our country?
Well, I so appreciate the point that my colleague from Michigan has been making. And if we think about the fundamental difference between a democracy and authoritarian government, one way of describing that difference is that in a democracy, elected representatives of the people, like folks who are gathered here right now, work together, bringing their diverse life experiences, their knowledge of their individual states, and together find a strategy that will address their collective challenges so that each and every part of the country is represented and things are addressed that are important to every part. That design of the programs and how they will operate and how they will fund happen in a democracy in a chamber like this. In an authoritarian system, it's all happening on the executive side. The executive is saying, here are the programs that are going to be funded. Here are my priorities and what I'll do. Here are the grants I'll cancel and the ones that I'll redirect. Here is the way we'll run these programs. And that is exactly what the Trump administration is trying to do. They are trying to move the responsibility we have under the Constitution to design programs, to decide how much they should be funded, to resolve questions about how they will operate, and move that responsibility over to the executive. And the head of Office of Management and Budget, he was very upfront about it. He said, I believe in the unitary executive, where all power rests with the president. And that means the president can cancel programs at will. And I was shocked when I heard him say this. This was before we had the hearing in the Budget Committee, probably about the same time you were holding a hearing on Russell Vogt. And I said, you know, that's already been adjudicated by the Supreme Court. There was an effort in 1996 to do a line item veto. and allocate to the president the ability to say, these programs go forward, these programs fail. And the Supreme Court said, hell no, you can't do that. The Constitution assigns the responsibility to the legislature to decide what gets funded, and the executive has to implement that plan. And when the question of impoundments came up at an earlier date, we're on a different strategy. Nixon said, hey, I think I'll just not forward the funding. I will impound it so certain programs won't get funded. Again, that had gone to the Supreme Court. And again, the Supreme Court said no. But Mr. Vogt sat in my office, and he said, well, I believe that we will get this issue to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will back the unitary executive, strengthen the executive powers in this country. And I just shook my head. I like, that can't possibly happen. But what happened just a short time ago? A piece of this went to the court, and in their shadow docket, and the question was, could the administration slow walk funding to the last 45 days of the fiscal year, then bring over a request for us to undo that funding, it's called a rescission, and then because there's a 5-day grace period pause, the fiscal year expires and the funding authorization goes poof, and suddenly the president has killed the program. And the court, on their preliminary response, said, yeah, we think you can do that. So Russell Vogt certainly seems to have a better grip on where the Supreme Court is, but I just feel like we have to do everything we can, therefore, legislatively, to stop that. Our spending bills need to say that if we have a bipartisan spending bill, that decision to undo that program can only be done by a bipartisan bill in the future, which is the way we do rescissions now. We have money that's left over from a program or this program, and we say that money can be brought back in, it's not needed, but we do it in a bipartisan manner, not in a manner that gives the power of the purse to the President of the United States. And this is a collective effort that all of our Republican and Democratic colleagues should be involved in. I mean, collectively, we need to be defending our role in the Constitution, and this is central to the separation between authoritarian power and a democracy. I've been on the Senate floor to ring the alarm bells for a long time, somewhere around 6:25 yesterday. And I want to thank people who have been here with me the whole time, people who made this happen. My team, Merkley staff, who I see a few of them, and quite a few of them are here. I'm so pleased, and I appreciate their support. The Capitol Police, who had to stay through the night. The Democratic and Republican floor staff, who had to stay and go forward without being, if you will, the center of attention. They had to, make sure everything went right, and they did. The Senate pages who have come and gone through the night, but I think it's pretty cool that you were here. Every now and then when I was a little lonely, I'd look over, I'd see some heads peeking around the corner over on this side. That was great. That page program is extraordinary. And I hope all of you will think about how you find a path in life to build a better world. There is no better mission for a soul on this planet to find a way to build a better world. A million ways to do it. The Senate doorkeepers, thank you. So appreciate you all. Senate parliamentarians, oh my goodness. I don't know what kind of flowers I can possibly bring, but I will be in your debt for a long time. Thank you. The presiding officers. So many of my colleagues from across the aisle had to come, and I know how hard it is to sit in that chair. I did my 100 hours in that chair, plus quite a few, and I know it's awfully hard to be there and not even be able to respond when maybe someone disagrees profoundly, and yet you are here making it possible that I could carry this conversation, ringing the alarm bells about authoritarianism. Couldn't have been done if you all hadn't come and held the floor. So thank you. And all of you colleagues who came to give a little dissertation and ask a question, and sometimes a longer dissertation. And I was like, thank you, thank you. I appreciate that so much. We are in the most perilous moment, the biggest threat to our republic since the Civil War. President Trump is shredding our Constitution. Our nation has spent 250 years striving toward a vision of equal justice. Of course, we had our Declaration of Independence. It took a few years to get our Constitution that we now have in place, 1787. But we have been striving towards this vision in which everyone is empowered in this country. And I always think about how the foundation of the law is carved into the facade above the Supreme Court pillars, and it says equal justice under law. You know, the very first political act I took was when I was a junior in high school. And I read an article in the evening paper, back when there was often a business paper in the morning and a labor paper in the evening, the Oregon Journal. And the article said that Agnew, Vice President Agnew, had been convicted of bribery, convicted of taking $100,000, the article said, and he had been given a fine of $10,000. And I was like, what? For the rich and powerful, they get to keep 90% of their proceeds? So I fired off a letter to the Oregon Journal and said, this is not right in a nation that values equal justice under law. And they printed it. And they're long out of business. I'd like to get a copy of that, but long out of business. But the vision Trump is putting forward is unequal injustice. It's a huge assault on the foundation for our nation. And what we have is a nation in which the founders, and many of you spoke so eloquently to this, a nation in which the founders said, we do not want to have a king. We want to have government that flows up from the people, not down from a monarch. And so they put together their best ideas. They wrestled with it at the Constitutional Convention. They went through many versions of what the Senate would look like and even what our terms would look like. At one point, 12 years. At one point, lifetime. Right now, I'm wishing it was a little less than 6 years myself. But the challenge we have is that that vision of a separation of powers, of checks and balances, is being steadily destroyed by President Trump. In the book that I was using as kind of the framework for discussing these issues, it says most people, even today, think it's still republics die with men wielding guns. And it is essential we understand that that is not the way most republics die today. Most republics die because someone is elected who starts working systematically to reduce those checks and balances. And then perhaps they're aided by a rubber stamp Congress. And perhaps they're aided by a Supreme Court that vests more power in the executive with key decisions. And of course, it takes that aggressive authoritarian personality. And we've got all three. We are fully in the authoritarian moment right now. The president believes that he is the king of this country and that he can control everything regardless of what the law says or what we send him. And we have to collectively, and it should be a bipartisan effort, collectively say, hell no. We took an oath to the Constitution, to the vision of government by and for the people, not government by and for the powerful. And we're going to keep fighting to restore that vision. And today, so many of you highlighted so many pieces of what's going wrong in our country in terms of the erosion. A president who wants to tell universities what they can teach and is using research grants over their head. A president who wants to tell law firms who they can give pro bono help to and has forced them to various firms to chuck up $1 billion to be done for pro bono work on the places, the organizations Trump wants them to spend it. A president who is using every tool available to try to get the court decisions that will allow him to use both the National Guard and the troops to be able to go where in the country he wants them domestically, even if there is no insurrection, no rebellion, and no invasion. A president who is weaponizing the judiciary to go after person after person after person, coming off his enemies list. And whoever it might be that's next, one of us may be next. One of our colleagues has certainly been publicized by Trump as being on Trump's enemies list. And this is just not to be allowed in government by and for the people. The crushing of due process, and I appreciate the comments of my colleague from Illinois about due process and all of the challenges regarding immigration and due process. And let's find a way to finally pass an immigration bill after coming so close so many times. And Senator Durbin, I know you are retiring, but let's get the immigration fix done before you leave us with all of your expertise. Your group of 8 that you put together before you did incredibly fabulous work, and this is way past due that we have that foundation of law with many of the pieces of improvements for justice. We saw on day one of this administration, Trump down there in the rotunda with the billionaires standing behind him. And from that moment, it was apparent. That's what his government was about, by and for the wealthy and the powerful. And if we had any doubts, then it was resolved when he put forward his version of a bill, which he called the Big Beautiful Bill, and we often called, many of us, the Big Ugly Betrayal. Because only an authoritarian president who believes that the people answer to him rather than him being accountable to the people would come up with a strategy of decimating the health care through the ACA to fund tax breaks for billionaires. Only an authoritarian president would say, let's demolish Medicaid, and between Medicaid and ACA, have 15 million people lose their health care, 235,000 projected in my state. Only an authoritarian would say, let's cut child nutrition to fund even more tax breaks for billionaires. And then, of course, on top of all that, put forward a plan that runs up $30 trillion in debt, additional debt over 30 years. Probably the most fiscally irresponsible bill ever to pass through this chamber. And that $30 trillion of additional debt will so compromise our efforts to take on the foundations for ordinary families, for health care, for housing, for education, for good-paying jobs. The 4 foundations that give a family a chance to stand on their feet and thrive. So we all have taken an oath to the Constitution. So let's all work together in every possible way to ring the alarm bells, because it is a fact that if we do not ring the alarm bells, well, the longer you are in an authoritarian state, it becomes more and more entrenched. And so we have to fight it in every possible way. I'm so proud of the 7 million Americans who took to the street in every one of our states at those 2,700 different locations all across the country to say no kings. They were ringing the alarm bells. They were saying that it is absolutely unacceptable to have an authoritarian government. And that is the largest demonstration in U.S. history. And for each one of those 7 million, they have families, they have friends who knew that they were doing this, who are becoming educated about the challenge that we're facing right now. And we have to recognize that the next election is absolutely critical if we're going to save our republic, because the strategy of an authoritarian is to rig the elections. And the more time they have, the more entrenched it becomes. And already, here is Trump trying to do a national voter registration file that can be more easily manipulated for the elections next year. Here is President Trump trying to do massive gerrymandering in a whole bunch of states in order to offset the balance between Democrats and Republicans that are fairly represented in the House of Representatives. Here is President Trump saying he will do everything possible to stop the use of vote by mail across the country because we know why. Because vote by mail has such integrity. It can't be manipulated on election day like precincts can. In precincts, you can move their location. You can put them where there's no parking. You can understaff them. The machines can break down. You can send intimidators. You can proceed to put out fake information about their location. You can put out information the election was last week when it's really this coming Tuesday. Can't do that with vote by mail. And when we have the majority, we must pass the For the People Freedom to Vote bill and lock down the integrity of our elections so we will not worry for a generation about the people having a fair voice in our government by and for the people. I'm proud to be colleagues with all of you in this effort. Thank you very much, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Recognize the Democrat leader.
Mr. President, let me express the profound gratitude of all of us for his amazing tour de force over these many hours. Jeff Merkley has been the Paul Revere of 21st century America, literally, figuratively riding from one corner of this country to the other, alerting people to the danger our democracy is in with the would-be king as president. No one has done it better. No one has done it with more persistence. No one has done it with more passion. No one has done it with more effectiveness than Jeff Merkley. Not only this Senate, but much more importantly, all of America owes you a tremendous, tremendous debt. Thank you.
I recognize the Republican whip.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President,
Can the Senate in
one of
order,
our
please?
colleagues just spent over 22 hours. One of our colleagues just spent over 22 hours on this floor reading from a book, reciting poetry, one poem at least 4 times, and talking about renovations currently going on at the White House. It was 22 hours of what I can only describe as rubbish. I come to the floor today to ask a simple question. What did Democrats actually accomplish? The government's still closed. Capitol police officers and Senate support staffers who were here for the entire 22 hours are still not getting paid. So let me read, Mr. President, from the record and into the record, an article published today in the Daily Caller written by Adam Pack. The headline is this. It's entitled, "Democrat Forces Unpaid Capitol Police to Stay Up All Night So He Can Rail Against Republicans." Let me tell you the title again. Democrat Forces Unpaid Capitol Police to Stay Up All Night So He Can Rail Against Republicans. The article goes on. Democrats are refusing to pay support staff and Capitol Police during the government shutdown, but still force them to work overnight Wednesday so a lawmaker could rail against the Trump administration from an empty Senate chamber. Can we have order, Mr. President?
Can you please take your conversations outside the chamber? Please take your conversations outside the chamber. Thank you.
To repeat, Mr. President, I said Democrats are refusing to pay support staff and Capitol Police during the government shutdown, but still force them to work overnight Wednesday so a lawmaker could rail against the Trump administration from an empty Senate chamber. The article goes on. Democratic Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley took to the Senate floor for, as they wrote this, a 14-hour-long, now 22, and counting screed against President Donald Trump beginning early Tuesday morning. The article continues. His overnight talkathon, which was still ongoing at the time of publication, forced floor aides and Capitol Police to work throughout the night despite staffers missing their first full paycheck due to the funding lapse on Monday. And Capitol Police poised not to receive their salary later this week. Merkley blasted Trump's decision to deploy National Guard to Portland, Oregon over the objections of state and local officials during his marathon speech. It goes on. He also denied that violence had occurred outside an Immigration and Customs Enforcement facility in Portland, despite at least 195 rioters being arrested outside the building since June. Portlanders have responded in a very interesting way, Merkley said in the opening hour of his speech. They are demonstrating with joy and whimsy. The article goes on. They want to make it clear to the world that what Trump is saying about there being violent protests or a rebellion in Portland, Merkley continued, it's just not true. Democrat New Jersey Senator Andy Kim also joined Merkley on the Senate floor in the 10 p.m. hour, praising the Oregon senator for shining a light on the Trump administration's alleged authoritarianism. It's important that we don't underestimate the fragility of our democracy, Kim said. Senate staffers missed their first full paychecks on Monday after Democrats consistently rejected House-passed bipartisan spending bills to fund the government. A wide swath of federal employees will not receive their salary on Friday if Democrats do not supply the votes to end the shutdown. The article goes on. Merkley and Kim have voted with Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer on 11 separate occasions to keep the government shuttered during the 22-day-long funding lapse. Just 3 Democrat Senate caucus members have thus far crossed party lines to fund the government, leaving the spending measure short of the necessary 30-vote threshold to move most legislation in the Senate. Republicans blasted Merkley's overnight speech during the shutdown, arguing the move was unfair to floor aides and Capitol Police officers working unpaid because Democrats refuse to fund the government. The article goes on. The Democrats are going to make Capitol Police and Capitol staff, support staff, who they refuse to pay, work all night so they can give speeches patting themselves on the back for shutting down the government and hurting the American people, Senate Majority Whip John Barrasso wrote on X. How ridiculous is that? Senators whose pay is protected by the U.S. Constitution receive their salaries on Monday. The Senate is expected to vote on legislation this week sponsored by Republican Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson to pay military personnel and federal employees who are reporting to work during the shutdown. Democrats are expected to filibuster the bill. Several members of their caucus have argued that every federal worker should be paid during the shutdown, despite repeatedly voting against reopening the government. The article continues, Merkley's overnight remarks follow other Senate Democrats staging all-night speeches to protest the Trump administration this year. In April, the article concludes, New Jersey Senator Cory Booker delivered the longest Senate floor speech in history to attack the president and his policies. Mr. President, the facts speak for themselves. Americans deserve better than Democrats' rubbish. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Recognize the senator from Montana.
Mr. I'm going to make some comments about my friend Bill Mercer. It's one of the judges we'll be voting for here in a minute. But let me just set the record straight on something. I'm tired of the lies being spread around the country.
Real quick. Thank you.
there's a lie being spread around the country now on social media and so forth about what's happening here in Washington. And the lie is this: the Republicans control the presidency, the House, and the Senate, so it's on the Republicans for shutting it down. That is a lie. It takes 60 votes to get something done here in the U.S. Senate. We are looking for 5 Democrats to join us. It's already bipartisan. 3 Democrats have joined us. If 5 more join the Republicans, we've done this 11 times in voting for this clean CR, which Democrats have done repeatedly under Joe Biden's watch. If 5 Democrats join us, we'll open the government back up. But just want to set that straight at home. Yes, Republicans have majority control of the Senate, but it takes 60 votes to get an outcome here in Washington. We have 53 Republicans, 5 Democrats join us, we'll get this done. But, Mr. President, I rise today to speak in support of my friend, Mr. Bill Mercer, and his nomination to serve as the next judge of the U.S. District Court for the District of Montana. President Trump made an excellent choice when he picked Bill. I was thrilled to see him quickly approved by the Senate Judiciary Committee, and now today the U.S. Senate will vote in the next hour or so on his final confirmation, and I urge my colleagues to join Senator Sheehy and I in supporting his nomination. Bill is a lifelong Montanan. He was born in Billings. We've known each other for a long time. In fact, we went to rival high schools, and we actually competed against each other in speech and debate. He was a Billings West Golden Bear, and I was a Bozeman Hawk. This is what makes America great. 2 kids from Montana dreamed big, they worked hard, and now have the opportunity to serve the state we love together. Bill received his undergraduate degree from the University of Montana. He later went on to receive a Master of Public Administration from Harvard and his law degree from George Mason University. Bill served his state and country in various roles over the past 3 decades. In Montana, he served as a U.S. Attorney for the District of Montana from 2001 to 2009, and he represented Billings in the Montana House of Representatives for the past 7 years. Bill also worked at the U.S. Department of Justice, where he served as Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General and Acting Associate Attorney General during the George W. Bush administration. He's been actively engaged in his community, serving in 5 nonprofit boards of directors in Montana. Bill's been a member of the Montana Bar for 32 years. He's appeared in state and federal court in Montana and as lead counsel in numerous cases. He has represented clients in appellate courts, which resulted in oral arguments in 15 cases in the Courts of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, the D.C. Circuit, and the Montana Supreme Court. Bill's been recognized by his peers in the legal community for outstanding track records, being rated among the best lawyers in Montana for environmental and commercial litigation. Throughout his extensive legal career and years of public service, Bill has represented Montana's interests very well. He is committed to the rule of law and the original interpretation of the Constitution. He understands Montana law and issues. His experience as a widely respected and effective member of the Montana House has helped him understand the needs of our state, our families, and our communities. I believe his time serving in Helena has given him an important perspective on the law and the importance of judicial impartiality. Federal judges play a critical role in our government. It's important that we pick servant leaders who are committed to our founding ideals and protecting the role of the judiciary. These are lifetime appointments. They will have a lasting impact on both Montana and the nation. I have no hesitation when I say that Bill is the top choice to serve as Montana's next federal judge. I've seen his commitment to our state firsthand, his time at the Department of Justice as U.S. Attorney, as the state legislature prepared him well. There's not a better pick to serve the state of Montana. I urge my colleagues to join me in voting favorably for Bill's confirmation. I look forward to seeing the profound influence that Bill will have in Montana and the nation as he steps into this new role. Thank you.
I recognize the Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that notwithstanding Rule 22, following the cloture vote on the motion to proceed to calendar number 168, H.R. 5371, the Senate vote on the motion to invoke cloture on the Lewis nomination, and if cloture is invoked on the Lewis nomination, all post-cloture time be expired, and the Senate vote on the motion to invoke cloture on the Meredith nomination. Further, if cloture is invoked on the Meredith nomination, all post-cloture time be expired, and the Senate vote on confirmation of the nominations at a time to be determined. by the Majority Leader in consultation with the Democratic Leader no earlier than Thursday, October the 23rd. Further, if confirmed, the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table, and the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action. Finally, the mandatory quorum calls with respect to calendar number 168, H.R. 5371, as well as the Meredith and Lewis nominations be waived.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I ask the Chair to execute the order of October 21st with respect to calendar number 168, H.R. 5371, and I further ask that following disposition of that vote, the Chair execute the previous orders with respect to the Lewis, Meredith, and Mercer nominations in that order.
The clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a closed debate on the motion to proceed to calendar 168, H.R. 5371, an act making continuing appropriations and extensions for fiscal year 2026 and for other purposes, signed by 17 senators.
By unanimous consent, the mandatory quorum call has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that debate on the motion to proceed to H.R. 5371, an act making continuing appropriations and extensions for fiscal year 2026 and for other purposes shall be brought to a close? The yeas and nays are mandatory under the rule. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alston-Brooks.
Thank you.
Ms. Baldwin. Mr. Banks. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Bennett. Mrs. Blackburn. Mr. Blumenthal. Ms. Blunt-Rochester. Mr. Booker. Mr. Bozeman. Thank you. Mrs. Britt. Mr. Budd. Ms. Cantwell. Mrs. Capito. Mr. Cassidy. Ms. Collins. Mr. Coons. Mr. Cornyn. Ms. Cortez Masto. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Kramer. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Curtis. Mr. Daines. Ms. Duckworth. Mr. Durbin. Ms. Ernst. Mr. Fetterman. Mrs. Fisher. Mr. Gallego. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Mr. Haggerty. Ms. Hassan. Mr. Hawley. Mr. Heinrich. Mr. Hickenlooper. Ms. Hirono. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Husted. Mrs. Hyde-Smith. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Justice. Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Kim. Mr. King. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Langford. Mr. Lee. Mr. Lujan. Ms. Lummis. Mr. Markey. Mr. Marshall. Mr. McConnell. Mr. McCormick. Mr. Merkley. Mrs. Moody. Mr. Moran. Mr. Marino. Mr. Mullen. Ms. Murkowski. Mr. Murphy. Mrs. Murray. Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Padilla. Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Risch, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, thanks. Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Sheehy, Ms. Slotkin, Ms. Smith, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Tuberville, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Warner, Mr. Warnock, Ms. Warren, Mr. Welch, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative: Barrasso, Crapo, Daines, Grassley, Haggerty, Marino, and Thune. Senators voting in the negative: also Brooks, Blunt Rochester, Booker, Cantwell, Duckworth, Gallego, Kane, Kelly, Klobuchar, Murray, Padilla, Peters, Reed, Schatz, Schiff, Schumer, Smith, Van Hollen, Whitehouse, and Wyden. Mr. Graham, aye. Mrs. Hyde-Smith, aye. Mr. Murphy? No. Ms. Slotkin? No. Mr. Durbin? No. Mr. Merkley? No. Mr. Sheehy? Aye. Mr. Cornyn? Aye. Mr. Langford? Aye. Mrs. Capito? Aye. Mr. Curtis? Aye. Mr. Cotton? Aye. Mrs. Blackburn? Aye. Ms. Lummis? Aye. Mr. Ossoff? No. Mr. King? Aye. Ms. Rosen? No. Ms. Hassan? No. Ms. Baldwin? No. Ms. Cortez Masto? No. Mr. Cassidy? Aye. Ms. Cortez Masto? Aye. Mr. Risch, aye. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Mrs. Shaheen, no. Mr. Welch, no. Ms. Collins, aye. Mr. Warner, no. Mr. Bozeman, aye. Ms. Ernst, aye. Mr. Johnson, aye. Mr. Marshall. Mr. Marshall, aye. Mr. Paul? No. Mr. Young, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand? No. Mr. Kennedy, aye. Ms. Hirono? No. Mr. McCormick, aye. Mr. Sullivan? Aye. Mr. Hickenlooper? No. Mr. Cruz? Aye. Mr. Hawley? Aye. Mr. Budd? Aye. Mr. Mullen, aye. Mr. Schmidt? Aye. Mr. Wicker? Aye. Mr. Heinrich? No. Mr. Lujan? No. Mr. Fetterman, aye. Mr. Husted, aye. Mrs. Britt, aye. Mr. Ricketts, aye. Mr. Scott of Florida, aye. Mrs. Moody, aye. Mr. Scott of South Carolina, aye. Ms. Warren, no. Mr. Blumenthal, no. Markey? No. Mr. Bennett? No. Mr. Rounds? Aye. Mr. Kramer? Aye. Mr. Hoven? Aye. Mr. Kim? No. Mr. Moran, aye. Mr. Justice, aye. Mr. Tillis, aye. Mr. Sanders, no. Mr. Tuberville, aye. Mr. Banks, aye. Mr. Coons, no. Mr. McConnell, aye. Mr. Lee, aye. Mr. Warnock, no.